For duty.
Good evening. It is the 25th of May, 7:30 p.m. We are going to open with the pledge, followed by at least a minute of silence, just for some thoughtful silence about the massacre that occurred in Texas, thinking about those children and all of their families. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. This is a work session. As I like to explain every once in a while, work sessions are for staff to present, share ideas, present ideas, potential legislation, etc. I do think, though, we're opening with special meeting. Yes, Stuart?
Mayor, we're actually doing the work session first.
Followed
and we will
by?
then go into the special meeting.
Yeah, I finally got this whole thing right after all this time and switching on me.
We
Okay,
apologize for confusing.
thanks. Okay, and we have guests on with us as panelists tonight, some attendees. As everyone knows, all our meetings are recorded, just as an FYI. So very much appreciated. And I think we are, oh, so I put the wrong one on. Sorry about that, folks. I'm looking at my other screen. All right. So I don't think that there are any announcements for tonight, even though it's a work session. Dana White usually likes to make a few announcements for us. So I'm sure for Memorial Day there might be.
Well, I was going to talk about the IFCA thrift store.
Please do.
They had a ribbon cutting at their new location today, which I think is 96 Croton. It's just down from Los Americanos and there and across from Seatown. And you know, they've been at Spring Street and they just opened a big new store. It's like a storefront with a sign and everything, and it was great. And they had the ribbon cutting, and I'm a total thrift store junkie, so I'm in heaven. I'm so glad that they're open again. You do have to wear a mask if you go in, but they've got great stuff, and all the proceeds go to IFCA, which, as we know, is our local affordable housing nonprofit. So it all goes to a super good cause too. So go.
Great. Yeah, I passed by the location. Actually, I'm wearing a necklace.
Me too. I got this today.
Yeah, I got mine last time in their old area, but I'll drop in this weekend. I mean, I look at their hours and I'll drop in, encourage everyone else in the community to do so. Any other announcements before we go to work session? People need to know. Memorial Day parade. It's all over the blast. It's all over social. Enjoy the 3-day weekend for those of you that get the 3-day weekend. Okay, ready to go with the work session, folks? Who's presenting on behalf?
I think I'm doing the Karen dance tonight, Mayor. I think me.
I think you are, Maddie.
All right.
Welcome to the supervisor and Victoria Caffarelli, as well as others. Let's get started.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, board. Good evening, everybody. So yes, first on the agenda, we have our friends from the town of Ossining joining us to speak about MOGO, which is the Millwood Ossining Go initiative, which is a couple years old. And the town has been very steadfast in seeking funding for MOGO, which, as the supervisor and Victoria Caffarelli will explain, is an initiative to make some east-west connections between existing bike paths, which are seriously lacking in our part of Westchester County. So on that note, I will turn it over to Supervisor Levenberg to explain to us what MOGO is and what progress has been made since the board has last heard about it.
Okay, well, thank you so much to the wonderful Assistant Village Manager, Maddie Zahaj, for that opening, and also Mayor Levin and village trustees. Thank you for the opportunity to present this evening. I am not actually exactly sure where you left off in terms of your understanding about MOGO. It was my belief, and maybe that was a false belief, that there are some board members trustees who may not be that familiar with the project. So I'm going to just talk a little bit overall about the project, how it got started, why it got started, and what we've done to date and what we still need to do, which is quite a lot. So the Millwood-Ossining Go Planning Initiative really came out of a challenge from a constituent who lived along Route 133, happened to live in an unincorporated town, and said that he likes to walk. And he had talked to the state about fixing up 133. And they said, basically, whether it was like the local shop or whatever in I don't know if it's in Millwood or not, but he basically said they told him, look, 133 is the bottom of the list. It's never going to get fixed up. So that to me sounded like quite the challenge. And when we think about 133, what we know is that it really does connect up a number of open space assets, including the old Croton Aqueduct, essentially gets over the old Croton Aqueduct, the Briarcliff Peekskill Trailway, which I learned about actually through as part of this process, which is again a north-south open space asset that is good for walking and for cycling, I believe. And also the North County Trail, now known as the Empire State Trail, which, you know, goes all the way up to Buffalo, I believe. So, and down to the city. So, you know, this was also the governor's initiative. And we looked at, wouldn't it be fantastic if we could get from downtown Ossining over to the Empire State Trail by bike and make it easier to walk and bike? And, you know, initially we were looking at 133, but we brought stakeholders together, and those stakeholders included the town of Newcastle and the village of Ossining, as well as we got input also from the village of Briarcliff trustees and a number of other stakeholders. And we applied for a grant. Hudson Valley Greenway awarded us $30,000, which was like the largest planning grant that they had ever given to one single project. And the New York State DOT really also liked this project very much. We pitched it as a demonstration project for east-west connectivity, basically could be even from the train all the way over to the Empire State Trail, which again is, you know, has the ability to connect people up via bike and walk, and also is a good ecotourism opportunity. And we thought that this would be another ecotourism opportunity, as well as make it easier for people to commute along the route. So together with all our stakeholders, including Westchester County Department of Planning, we worked with everybody to develop a plan. And as we started looking at the different ways to get from point A to point B, what we came up with was more of, and with a lot of public input, I want to say we held public workshops at the Austin Public Library, at Club Fit, and Club Fit was a big supporter of this because they're close to the Empire State Trail, and they also like the idea of, you know, connecting people with these open space assets. And also we were at the Earth Day Festival in 2019. So we got a lot of public input and really thought about what it would mean to make these, you know, connect up these areas. And what we found is we kind of created what we called the Emerald Necklace of connections. And we didn't just look at 133, we looked at other ways that people could get easily from point A to point B. And I like to call it like the ski trail map kind of bike accessibility. How would we get from point A to point B? Some paths may be steeper, some paths may be more, you know, busier streets, some may be more residential streets, but there are a number of ways that we found, and there is actually data out there through, not SCADA, but there's something like SCADA, I can't remember what it's called now, where you can actually look at the ways that people bike who use apps, like biking apps and things like that. So we were looking for how you get there for somebody who's like an avid cyclist and is going out for their 50-mile ride, for somebody who wants to just go for, you know, whatever, an hour or so, or just going, you know, out for a nice ride. Maybe they have their you know, mountain bike like I do, and they ride that one on the roads because they feel more secure. Or maybe they have kids that they're taken on the back seat, you know, and they're going for just a nice ride for the day. So we were looking at all different ways that we could connect, how we could also connect up with some of our, you know, economic interests, our business districts, and basically where are people cycling anyway, and how can we make that safer for people, and how can we start sort of taking the approach that I think Mr. Dave Whitlinger brought to our attention that Portland, Oregon had done in the 70s, which is, look, if we start every time we pave a road, decide to put striping on the road for cycling, we're going to make this place more conducive to biking. So you got to start somewhere, right? And now I think Portland is one of the safest and bikingest communities in the US. So that they started a long time ago, but you got to start somewhere. So what we really found is that as we put this map together, we had a lot of opportunities and some low-hanging fruit. So I think we're going to the next slide. Maybe is there something I missed on that slide, Victoria? Okay, so go ahead.
No, I would just note that I think once the plan was developed and the map was developed,
Sorry.
the plan was adopted by all 3 municipal boards that were involved in the process. So Town of Ossining, Town of Newcastle, and Village of Ossining as well.
Right.
Sort of what happened next, at least from the town's perspective, is we took this plan and then started thinking about projects that were sort of these low-hanging fruit that we could begin implementing. So in the town, we started with the North State Road bike lane. We worked with Sam Schwartz engineers to develop plans for striping North State Road, adding signage, and also this bike box here, which you can see here, which is a little refuge for cyclists at the traffic light there, to allow cyclists to come off of the North County Trail, frequent North State Road, travel on North State Road. And we were able to do this with a grant from the Clean Energy Communities Program, which is through NYSERDA.
Also paid for signage.
Yes, signage too. And also it was like, wayfinding signage as well to and from the North County Trailway, which was, really, really great to include, especially since the DOT has also improved that corridor there on Route 100. So also, as the supervisor mentioned, we did bring in the New York State DOT early on as a stakeholder, and they were very enthusiastic about 133, which kind of kept coming up as what we called the Cadillac route, because it was the most direct and the least steep route from getting from point A to point B, from Town of Newcastle in the Millwood area to the downtown Village of Ossining. So basically what the DOT offered to do was to conduct a feasibility evaluation for establishing New York State Route 133 as a state bike route. So they kind of took this part of the puzzle off and did an evaluation of it, sort of looking at it from a very high level overview. And it was included as an appendix to the MOGO plan, and it was also incorporated into the public engagement process. And now what we've been working on is trying to implement, 133 is the Cadillac route. It is also the most expensive. It's not going to be a small $50,000 project like North State Road is. So what we've been working on for the past couple of years is trying to get funding for this route. So when New York State looked at 133, they started here at the intersection with Route 9 in the Village, all the way to the intersection with Route 100 and the North County Trailway in Town of Newcastle. They then divided it up into 3 segments because the road is very different. I know we're all very familiar with this road, and certainly when you're in the Village of Ossining, it looks one way. When you're in Town of Newcastle, it looks very different. So they evaluated it into segments, with segment A being from Route 9 to Donald Lane. So essentially the Village of Ossining section, segment B from Donald Lane to Edgewood Road, which again, essentially Town of Ossining, and then from there to Route 100, which would be in the Town of Newcastle. And again, what their feasibility evaluation did was look at it, very high up, not detailed engineering, but just generally what would be feasible to complete along this road, and some general budget figures. So one of the grants that the town did take the lead on, and the village also did sign on to, so we're very appreciative of that, was a Transportation Alternatives Program grant, which is funded, it's organized by the New York State DOT, but it is federal funding. So the town asked Nelson Pope Voorhees, which is our planning firm that works with the town, to help us take sort of what the DOT had developed already and kind of fine tune it to give us real concrete budget figures and a little bit more detailed engineering concept plans to submit our application under the TAP. And what we applied for was for design and or engineering and construction for segments B and C, which are the town of Ossining and town of Newcastle sections, and design for segment A, which is the village of Ossining section. We understood that the village wasn't quite ready to jump towards construction yet because there's a couple of different factors going on, also including a lot of projects that are underway in the village, including the Route 9 road diet, the mobility study, Project Mover. There's lots going on, so we understand that some of those things need to play out before it can get to that point. But the TAP application would fund most of the segment B and C, but this is a very, very expensive project. So we need to continue applying for funding to try to bring this to fruition. So we have sought some funding from our congressman's office, as well as we did also have a commitment from Westchester County in their capital plan towards this project. So as we've been seeking funding, we hope that we can have the participation and support from the village of Ossining, as well as the town of Newcastle, so we can continue to move this project forward. And Dana, I can turn it back to you.
Okay, yeah, so as mentioned, we're very much looking forward to establishing this connectivity. We think that it's an opportunity also, not only for tourism, but also it's an environmental justice opportunity for improved ability to commute to work on a bicycle or an e-bike or an e-scooter at some point when we aren't all afraid to use those. In any case, also we think that it really serves as a demonstration project for connecting the Hudson Valley downtowns to the Empire State Trail. So we think that the state really has been very interested in the project. We presented to the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council and they really liked it. And that's all of the, it's I think it's New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Westchester County, Rockland, maybe even Nassau, I can't remember now all of them, but this is all, they line up projects for the next few years and they were very interested in this, but also suggested, and we've been continuing to work with the New York State DOT to get advice and counsel from them as to best places to seek support and money, and they suggested the TAP grant as well, as we're going to continue to look at that. We think that also it ties very nicely into complete streets approach, which we know the village has also adopted that policy a number of years ago, and transit oriented development. So it really it would be a nice way to connect to the train and to get people again here to figure out either commuting or tourism along the route, keeping them, coming up through along Main Street or maybe, the back, some of the other roads to get up the hill, depending on if they have an e-bike or not, and then getting all the way over to have a wonderful day throughout Ossining and then coming back through the village to go home at night. So we think it's a great, again, it also ties in safe routes to school. And I don't know if I left anything out. We do have links available that are part of the MOGO plan. Again, thanks to Westchester County Planning Department for helping develop the entire MOGO plan that, as Victoria mentioned, the village adopted, the town of Newcastle adopted, as well as the town of Ossining. And we also have, like I mentioned, had support from the village of Briarcliff, and we had support from cycling groups and hiking groups as well. And we had a lot of really, really great stakeholder input as well as public input for the overall plan. So we hope that we can continue to count on the village to write us letters of support, just as we write you letters of support. We know that we're all in this together and it can't happen any one of us alone. That's what's so special about our community, is that we really, we work so well together, and I hope that we can continue to do so. And if you have any questions, here we are.
Okay. Thank
I'm gonna
you,
stop sharing.
Supervisor Levenberg, and thank you, Victoria Caprelli. I'd actually, it was suggested and I agreed that, I think only 2 members of this board, or I'm sure you might all be familiar, but only 2 have sat through presentations and been involved in the voting. So I think it is time to bring this back to the front burner, so to speak. So I appreciate the presentation. Really moved much farther than last time I saw a presentation. A lot of progress. Generally, questions, comments from the board? Okay. Oh, Omar, do I see you unmuting?
Yeah, I want to say two things. One is gratitude. Thank you for presenting this to us and for pushing for this. I think that in some ways this is if you build it, they will come. And I, as someone that when I was commuting to the city, famously rode my bike to the Tracy orange bicycle. I'm a huge fan. I still love to cycle. And so the more that we could do this, the better. And then two is as this continues, that because we do have so many projects happening here in the village, now this is certainly something that I'm going to keep in mind as the conversations happen with these various projects. But if there's anything that we can specifically keep in mind, anything in terms of timing, any kind of those details, that's really helpful because it's hard to keep all of these different projects in mind and how they influence each other. And so when you have something like this that is perspective quite early in the process, if there's anything that we can do to mention to all the various consultants and we work with, particularly the ones outside of the village that haven't heard about this, please let us know because we're eager to want to make this work.
And I know Maddie's obviously very familiar with the project, but we did bring it up to for the road diet group. I think that we discussed it, as well as Project Mover. We talked to them about it, and I can't remember. I don't remember if it came up. It might have even come up in the parking study. We might have brought it up as well to keep in mind bikeability. It's really important when you're thinking about where you're going to put the cars, and also I think it's important to think about setbacks even along 133. When you're building and making sure that that there's enough room for pedestrians and cyclists as well as the cars. And cars shouldn't necessarily be the first and primary thing that we're all thinking about. I know that it's hard not to, but again, I think like you say, Trustee Lopez, that if you build it, they will come. That's one of the difficult things, is to get our mindset away from the single passenger vehicles. But we're continuing to, again, as you want to be the greenest village, we want to be the greenest town. As we continue to look for ways to get off of fossil fuels, we have to consider electric bicycles. We have to consider alternative transportation, and certainly first mile, last mile opportunities. And that's where some of these pieces come in. And, we're seeing obviously fewer and fewer cars parked at the train station now than ever before. And, again, maybe that gives opportunities for other uses of that space for other reasons. So again, I think that there's a lot of opportunities, and thank you for the shout out.
Oh, it.
Anyone else? Comments,
I-
questions, thoughts?
I would, Mayor, if I could. Dana, thank you for bringing this up. As the mayor mentioned, there was only 2 members that sits on the board that actually was part of that previous board when this was brought up. Obviously, things have changed. When I say things have changed, we have a lot of projects, like it was mentioned already, but not just projects from the village, actually projects in the village, from residential projects to commercial projects. And that's something that we all have to keep in mind. It's easy for us to say we want to be green. Sometimes it's a little bit harder to become that because of our nature, human nature itself. So I think for me is, and I haven't mentioned in the past, we have to think about all these variables, from pedestrian traffic to bike traffic to vehicle traffic. When the diet comes along, while we're trying to reconfigure something, is we pushing cars to different ways. And when we do that, is an effect. What causes that effect? So I think as we move forward, as you're right, we have to think about not just a project, but all these projects. Again, not just village projects, but actually projects that are happening in our village. So there's a lot of things that we have to juggle. So I'm not sure, how this is going to play out, but it's going to be interesting to come up with a solution. And I think that, whatever happens at that point, we have to be mindful of what that means. I do have a question. Last time when this study was come along, even though there was no money for us to do on the village, there was a planner that actually worked on the project. So it wasn't really money that we were putting out, it was time that we were putting out. In this case, when I looked at the price, the tax price, it was $4.3 million on behalf of the village in a way. When you talked about grants, can you explain a little bit more? At some point, are we talking about the state is going to be funding the whole project, or is the village going to have to fund part of this project, or how does that work?
So yeah, so there, as many of the grants do have matches. That's why we're continuing to look for other opportunities for grants that we can use as matches. So we do think we're going to end up having to have some skin in the game, as you always do have to have some skin in the game, but we're looking to parse that out along the route, so that it doesn't come down harder on any one municipality or the other, but also so that it's fairly parsed out. And I don't know, Victoria, do you want to talk about this at all in terms of
Yeah, so the budget figure that we had up there, so when that was developed, like I said, as part of our TAP application last fall, we had Nelson Pope Voorhees develop the budget for the entire route. But like I said, we did not apply for construction dollars in the village of Ossining because we just weren't there yet. And the sections in the town of Ossining and town of Newcastle are a bit more shovel ready than the village. So they were able to develop those budget figures so that we have something. Also, what you often have to do when you have these grant applications is do a little legwork beforehand and have your ducks in a row in terms of how much money you need to seek or what exactly the concept is going to look like. So the town did pay for our engineers to develop those plans across the entire route across all 3 municipalities. But we did not apply for construction dollars as part of the TAP. So we have that budget figure. We're sort of ready when the time comes, and we've done some of that background homework to get to that point. But we did not include that as part of the TAP application this time around. The TAP did require a match from a local match, part of which we're grateful to Westchester County for dedicating some funding towards this as well. So that is also incorporated into the general scope of what the towns and the village and the county can offer on the local side. There's a couple different opportunities, but that's where we are right now.
And I think we will see that we can get more money from the county. The county committed $250,000 to date. So I'm guessing that we'll be able to see more as we get closer to shovel ready project and we have more federal dollars lined up.
Right, that's helpful. So let me ask you another question. And with that one, I have more questions, but I can ask those when the next time, I guess.
I know, Manny, actually, let me chime in just for point of clarification. This is a presentation. We aren't voting on anything. This is a presentation to update the board on something we haven't heard about in a number of months. Questions, you could call Victoria directly because we're not voting right now. It's not legislation, it's informational. So feel free to ask questions, whatever.
Okay.
We don't have to wait for another
even better
our sessions, so to speak. No, seriously, because it was sort of like, because we have people running on the board theoretically every year, every 3 or 4 years, you realize that there's too many of us that may not be aware of some very important long-term, multi-year, multi-municipality projects. And there's no blue book or red book or black book or green book with a map. So we don't get this a lot, but I really appreciate the presentation. But please, anybody on here, we're not being asked for anything. It's informational, but it affects us very directly. Ask as many questions, but also remember, call Victoria or Dana, anytime with more questions. That goes for everybody here.
That'd be great. Thank you, Mayor. So just as a time frame, what are you guys looking into this? I guess that's my question. And then if I have more questions, I'll definitely reach out to you guys.
Well, I think we're expecting, hopefully within the next couple of months, a response on whether or not we were successful at securing the TAP application for, that I described. So we're hoping that will come through, like I said, the next couple of months. And then I believe I think it's a 2 to 3 year time frame to get things off the ground. I don't have that in front of me right now, but that's what we're hoping for that segment BC section. And that would, again, at least start taking a look at the section in the village and engineering and start moving it forward. So hopefully before the next time we've gone however many years since this plan was developed, we'll see some bike lanes on 133.
So is it, and I'm not going to hold anybody to this, sure. So is it more or less fair to say that in a year and a half, we'll be looking at section C, I want to call it, which is the village, if anything, come along at some point? just for
Design.
me, again, because
I
you
think just
said,
design.
Just
That-
design.
yeah,
honestly,
just the
let's be
design. Okay.
Just
The
design.
reason,
Yeah.
yeah, the reason why I'm saying that is because at some point of time, if we do have to match this, so whatever amount that will be, we have to keep that in consideration for a budget, so we can keep moving forward at that point. If a future board wants to do that, obviously,
Right.
or however it
right.
works out. So yeah.
Again, we're trying to get the state to pay for as much as we can. So we're gonna keep trying that. And the more we get into it, and the more that it looks realistic and something that actually can be achievable, I think the more that we'll see state money follow, and state resources also in terms of design and engineering, because they have been willing to do that for us. And I think if they see the TAP money come through, then they'll kind of jump up a little bit more. And we'll start to see some of that money come through. And
Oh,
then
yeah.
we'll have to see again. Remember, it's a state, for the most part, a state road,
Yeah.
right?
And it always is good to see free stuff into it, even though nothing is for free. But always is free is a nice portion that we can tell the residents that we didn't have to do this. But I
Right, but
appreciate
just
it.
again, like, same thing with the DRI. I mean, I think that there are a lot of opportunities, not only for, making it safer for cyclists, but for, bikeable, walkable community, for making our community less reliant on fossil fuels, for making, for economic development opportunities, environmental justice opportunities. I mean, there are really a lot of different points that this type of project hits. And so I think it's important to keep all of that in mind as you're going through the DRI, as well as all of the other projects, how it ties into that very, very cleanly. And, again, Project Mover. I mean, you're not going to be able to have all the bikes out on the road if you don't have safe places to bike. So this really ties into a lot of the projects that you are supporting currently. So hopefully we can get something done in the next couple of years. That would be great. And then down the line, get more done in the village as well.
Yeah, we don't want to be, I don't want to call municipalities, but we don't want to be a municipality that has a dead end bicycle lane in the middle of the road. So definitely not.
No.
And Maddie, just for you, put this into the master list plan that I've been asking, and you and I have been talking about that. So that's another layer of the master plan for us. Thank you guys. I appreciate your update.
And also, I just want to mention one thing. I think as a result of the village being involved in this project, we have fog lines on Underhill Road. So starting to bring attention to thinking about, as you repave roads, you put lines in to make it easier for cyclists and pedestrians. Thank you to the village for that.
No, really, I'm excited. I'm a big fan because there are other projects. And one of my big issues when I sort of started this whole journey personally is that municipalities, I couldn't really understand the inefficiencies of all this local governments and all the municipalities. I now understand the advantage of it. I won't go into my shtick about the importance of local government, but I will say that looking at people and not at vehicles and not at communities and not at anything except human beings who need to get from point A to point B, and how you make that most possible in the longest possible way across the state. Westchester having 1 million people, Westchester still having multiple bedroom communities to the city. And put into that what happened in COVID, when people really started using bicycles for both exercise and mental health. It's the only thing, Dana, that you didn't include in your list, but you should add mental health to it, because
Absolutely.
as COVID is still with us, the parks, open space, and cycling. So I spoke to someone who kept telling me, there are very few people who belong to those fancy bike groups. And then there are a whole bunch of kids that go with their parents to go cycling. And I said, you really need to look at mobility and not at bicycles. This is not about bicycle paths. This is how we build trains to get people to their jobs and to get from point A to point B. We build roads for the same reason, and we're building bike paths and walking paths exactly in the same way. How do people get around so that you don't have to get into a car, to put your bike on the back of your car, to go travel, to go find a place where you can park, to then go with I mean, if you can connect as much of New York State as you can, and eventually with the bridge, you connect to New Jersey and all of that stuff, you're really just connecting people to where they work, where they live, where they exercise. And I think a big part of it is mental health. And I'm not speaking as a person who bikes. I mean, I'm really not. But I know enough people of all ages. It's not an affluent sport. It's not a low income need. It's really all about the people that live in our community across the board, all of the sectors. And once, it isn't just that when we build it, they will come. For me as a mayor, it's all of these projects have to start getting more connected. And this is a project that actually connects a lot of projects and allows the engineers and people looking at roads, as Dana described, to really start understanding everything they have to take into account. Where does someone walk? Where do they drive? Where do they park? Where do they use their bicycles? Where do they walk with a stroller? Where do they have ADA? Like all of that has to be connected. It's not easy. It just becomes easier when you have projects like this because of the conversations that occur. So I'm like actually very excited about this project, and it really is helping the Mover project and our ability to get that going as well. And that's the whole point of this. And I'm psyched that people will be able to bike into Yonkers if they have a job, or into Manhattan or whatever as an option when the weather is nice. I think this is, I see like literally no downside to it. So, and you can't say that about every project. So I'm very happy that you guys continue with this from year to year, and eventually it's all going to get connected, and I see literally no downside. Even the money is money well spent, as we discussed earlier. So thank you for coming. And as Victoria mentioned, I guess we'll see you guys in 4 years with the news. And I'm not being funny, literally every few years, because I really think this is a long-term, every year more will get
Absolutely,
done.
yeah.
That's
Maybe it's
a
different
good
phases.
thing. No,
Yeah.
we have too many projects that die on the vine. This I don't think will. I think this is great. Okay,
And
anybody
since
else?
since you have the some wonderful OPD on the line too, you know, we have cops on bikes too, right? So it's good for them too. Makes it safer for them.
Yeah, it's again, I see literally no dice. That e-bikes are like a little new to me personally.
Hmm.
I do get some emails making fun of me because I promote the e-bikes. People
No,
don't
no
get them
reason.
yet, but in countries like Estonia and another, and I was in Israel where they're using them like crazy. In Manhattan, they're using them all over the place. You know, people love
Absolutely.
them. And then it becomes sort of how people get around, and people forget that they used to laugh at it. So it's all good.
100%. Thank you.
Thank you so much for attending and presenting. And I think we're ready, Maddie, for the next item.
Wish you good evening. Thanks.
Okay,
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
both.
Supervisor.
You're welcome to
Victoria.
stay for the rest of the meeting, by the way.
Thank you very much. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.
Night.
Bye.
Okay, so Mayor Board, our next two items are in sort of working towards the same initiative. The board, I'm sure, recalls, and the public may also, that back in the summer of 2020, then Governor Andrew Cuomo put forth the Police Reform and Reinvention Collaborative. The village entered a deliberative process in order to come up with what recommendations might be for Ossining. Meanwhile, all of our surrounding neighbors throughout the state and the county were doing the same. And one of the recommendations that came through the Ossining process, and several others, as well as the process in Westchester County proper, was the creation of a mobile mental health crisis unit to sort of append the work of local police departments. So I will turn it over now to our folks from Ossining Police. I believe we have Chief Kevin Sylvester, Lieutenant Zimmerman, and then also Mr. Mark Giuliano, who is from the Westchester County Department of Community Mental Health, I believe. And then Christopher John, I think he's going to join us as well for this. Is that correct, Mark?
Chris is here. I believe he's in the audience as a guest.
Okay, I just moved him over to panelist, so hopefully he will be with us very shortly.
Very good. There
All
he
right.
is.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks, Maddie. Yeah, so as Maddie said, the mobile crisis response team is a project that's been in work for quite some time. Our department participated with the Department of Community Mental Health to develop an RFP and to evaluate those RFPs for different groups that would be contracted to carry out the mission. Tonight with us, we've got Mark Giuliano and Christopher John, who are part of that team. So I'm going to turn it over to them to sort of describe what it is that they've got put together, and then we talk about how it applies here in Austin.
You're on mute, Mark.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate it. And thank you all for having us. My name is Mark Giuliano. I've been with Westchester County Department of Community Mental Health for the past 32 years. I started out my career at the Department of Mental Health, working with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and I jumped the fence into adult mental health services in 1999. As all of you are aware, you engaged in the process of coming up with a plan for reimagining policing and police reform. And I have to say that I'm really excited to partner with the Ossining Police Department because I know all of the great community work that Chief Sylvester and Lieutenant Zimmerman have done with the community. I actually am an avid Facebook follower of the Ossining Police Department social media page. I appreciate the transparency, and some of those things were some of the elements that came forth with police reform, was having that level of transparency and creating that link to the community. So with the Police Reimagining Task Force, County Executive Latimer took a look at all of the common themes through all of the different municipalities. Obviously, the county executive is not in a position to defund any local police department. That's not the way things work. All of you provide funding for your local law enforcement, your local police department. Nor did County Executive Latimer look to defund or change the way things were funded for the Westchester County Department of Public Safety, except to enhance what was already going on. So we're not looking to take away at all from any of the police initiatives that are out, but we did want to look to supplement through an initiative called Project Alliance. So Project Alliance really is a 5-prong approach. The first part of Project Alliance is 911 diversion training. Some of the communication personnel, desk officers from the Ossining Police Department have been through 911 diversion training. And wait, I believe at this point we have, I counted up, Chris, 497 police officers, desk officers, tour commanders that have gone through 911 diversion training. So 911 diversion training initially came to fruition in New York State, out in Broome County. Then it kind of migrated over to Ulster County. And each of those models is a little bit different than what we're doing here in Westchester. But the model itself actually was used out in Houston and in the Dallas Police Department and Albuquerque, New Mexico, to begin to try to divert people who are in crisis from having to interact with law enforcement when they didn't need to. Up until now, we've unfairly tasked law enforcement with the job of having to respond to every emergency within the community. Village of Ossining is no different. If it turned out that there was a fire within your community, obviously you would deploy the fire department or dispatch the fire department. If it turned out that there was a medical emergency within your community, you would send out your EMS or emergency medical services. If it turned out that there was criminal behavior or public safety issue, you would send out law enforcement. And if it turned out that there was a mental health crisis or a crisis with a young person who has autism spectrum disorder or an intellectual or developmental disability or substance use crisis or a crisis related to dementia, we always sent the police to do that job. And many police departments have become tremendously adept and phenomenal in de-escalating people, in getting them connected to the right services. But we took a look at how our system was working and thought we might have a better response if we can get people connected to an immediate resource. So that 911 diversion tool gives law enforcement the opportunity to get that person connected to an immediate telephone counselor at St. Vincent's Crisis Network team. So if it's a lower risk call, doesn't appear to be a situation in which there's any level of crisis, the person just needs someone to speak to, they can speak to a member of the Crisis Network team. I started out my career in 1986, 1987 up in Erie County, and I worked for the Suicide Prevention Crisis Intervention Lifeline up in Erie County. And I can tell you the people that I spoke to on the phone, they really just needed someone to speak to. And that's consistent with what they found out in Broome County when they began to develop this 911 diversion model. Most of the time, people just need someone to speak to. The way things operate through most of Westchester County, most of New York State, if someone says the word suicide, not that they're actively suicidal right now, but they're thinking about it, they're having dark thoughts. What we do is we extricate that citizen from their home. We deploy police resources. We take them out by ambulance. We take them over to the hospital only to find that the person wasn't at imminent risk. So we figured, why don't we get people connected to an immediate resource using kind of a risk needs responsivity tool. We're looking to see what the right level of service is. Second prong of Project Alliance was making sure that we had someone to answer the telephone, which is an important thing. If we're going to divert people over to a crisis network team, we need to make sure that we have trained crisis counselors. And so we provided funding to St. Vincent's Hospital to go live 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to answer the telephone for these crisis calls. They also become the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which will go live on July 16th of 2022. Right now, if you were in a state of suicidal crisis, you would have to dial 1-800-273-TALK. And to figure out TALK on your keypad or your telephone keyboard might be a little bit confusing. So nationally, 1-800-273-TALK has become 988, and it will go live locally on July 16th, and that's when the St. Vincent's Crisis Network team will begin to answer those phone calls 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Third prong of Project Alliance is making sure that our EMS personnel have the same level of training on how to work with somebody who's in a state of emotional crisis as any other first responder. Most of the time, it has been law enforcement and EMS responding to these crises. And those of us on the mental health side of the fence, we may have been responding 2, 3, 4 days after the fact, well after the crisis has been squared away and taken care of. That's when the mental health system has stepped up to the plate. We want to make sure that our EMS partners have the same level of language in working with that person who's in a state of emotional crisis, and the same level of support when we've got a person who's experiencing a person who's in emotional crisis. Fourth prong of Project Alliance is crisis intervention team training. We began to develop crisis intervention team training in Westchester County in 2006 and 2007. We provide 40 hours of crisis intervention team training to police officers at the Westchester County Police Training Academy. In addition to that, we've also exceeded the state standard for dealing with people in emotional crisis. New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services requires 21 hours of police mental health training. In the Westchester County Academy, we deliver 40 hours plus another 4-hour block on officer stress awareness. And then another block on disability awareness training. So they're receiving close to 50 hours of training in the academy on how to work with people who might experience a crisis. So we have hundreds of CIT trained officers, but we don't have too many formalized CIT teams. And the fourth part of Project Alliance was to begin to ensure that there's consistency across Westchester County. Final piece of Project Alliance, which is what you really were asking us to come and speak about, is the rollout and development of 8 mobile crisis response teams, one of which we intend, hope, plan to have co-located with the Ossining Police Department. If I'm a citizen in the village of Ossining and I go into a state of crisis, I'm going to dial 925-5959. That's the telephone number for the St. Vincent's Crisis Prevention Response Team. However, in this new model, if it turns out that a call for services comes in which it's a behavioral health crisis, as evidenced by the information that the desk officer, the tour commander, the dispatcher picks up, what they should, they now have the ability to deploy a mobile crisis response team, just like any other first responder. Some of the initial scope of services, they said that if it turns out that there's a mental health crisis or behavioral health crisis, what they would do is they would ensure that they would be there within 3 hours. And I said, that's not good enough. Chris and I looked at the scope of service and we said, if there was a fire in my house, I would want the fire department to be there a lot sooner than 3 hours. So we've pared that down to within 15 minutes. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days per year, we should have a mobile crisis response that would be dispatched through the Ossining Police Department and co-located with the Ossining Police Department. There was some discussion early on that perhaps we could leave the mobile crisis response teams in their own clinics, because we already have some clinic providers in the community. And our concern was if we leave the mobile crisis response team within the same culture of that clinic, they'll continue to do their business the same way. We wanted a different model. We wanted to make sure that this was a rapid response so that we could get the best possible resource out to the citizen, out to the resident within your community, to make sure that we had the safest outcome for the person, for their family, for the other residents within the community, for the officers involved. We wanted to make sure that if we could provide that support, we would be there to do it. And we want to do that in tandem with law enforcement. So not every call will require a co-response between law enforcement and the mobile crisis response team. There'll be some calls that it's a lower level call, and that tour commander, that desk officer, that desk sergeant recognizes that that we don't really have a public safety concern. But there'll be other calls that come in which there truly is a public safety concern. And it's appropriate to have law enforcement as the first response within this, and we stage the mobile crisis team to the side to provide the support. Our goal ultimately is to keep people safe and to reduce the number of crises that happen within the community. So the team that's that will be turning out in your catchment area, as I said, we're hoping to partner with the Ossining Police Department with this, and the team is going to be run by Family Services of Westchester. They also will be responding to in your catchment area would be Ossining, Sleepy Hollow, Briarcliff, Pleasantville, and Mount Pleasant. Those are the municipalities that your team would cover. We've got 8 teams across the county. And then in addition to that, we also have the crisis prevention response team, which will continue to reach out to people experiencing psychiatric crisis that call their mobile crisis line. The family service team will also be in you were all talking about there was some conversation about the ribbon cutting for the mobile crisis response team out of the Portchester Police Department. The Family Service of Westchester team, different team. They've got two contracts. They'll also have a team sitting over at the Portchester Police Department. So we're really excited to be able to partner with a police agency that's got such a great reputation for doing that community policing. And with you, Mayor, because a couple of minutes ago, you were noting the value of mental health. And we want to keep the residents and citizens within our communities well. We want to keep them connected to services that are meaningful to them. And we'd like to minimize the times that they're traumatized by the crisis that they experience. So this is basically Project Alliance in a nutshell. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Chris, who's joined us on the panel, who's out in the audience, the general audience, was brought on he's been a longstanding member of the Department of Mental Health. He's been our dual recovery coordinator and has worked in just about every program that I have overseen over the past 22 years. And Chris is specifically responsible for the launch of the elements of Project Alliance. He's been working lockstep with me in delivering the 911 diversion training. He's one of my training coordinators for the CIT training, along with the department, the Westchester County Department of Public Safety. And I trust him more than I trust myself sometimes in order to make sure that this gets up and running and done in a way that that's going to be meaningful to the people within the community. One of the things I didn't mention, and since I'm on a rambling, and I did want to point out that the Family Service of Westchester team, we've been really impressed about the fact that they've been able to hire a number of staff that are linguistically competent, recognizing the diversity of the community within the village of Ossining, as well as Sleepy Hollow, as well as their other host site in the village of Portchester. We've got people who are culturally competent, linguistically competent, and I think they're going to be able to make a real impact to the residents of your community. All of this is funded through Westchester County, and we're working on a sustainability plan so that 3 years down the line, we're not looking at that team that ends up crumbling. We want them to be able to be self-sustaining, recognizing that the county will continue to have to contribute to that. We're not looking to any of to the village or any of the municipalities for those contributions. And that's one of the things that Chris is also going to be working on is a sustainability plan. And we have a data analysis component of this as well, where we've contracted with an agency so that we can take a look to see where we're doing well. And if we need to change things, we're willing to learn within this process. So once again, Project Alliance in a nutshell. If you have any questions, happy to answer them.
Well, I'm sure there are. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us tonight, along with the chief and lieutenant. I couldn't agree with you more about everything that you said and the importance of it, not only to the police reform. This came out, the affordability of it. I don't think any single village or town municipality can afford it, possibly a Yonkers or a New Rochelle or a White Plains, the cities with greater than 80,000 population and infrastructure, maybe, but not the smaller communities. I think this is interesting. If I could ask a couple of questions. I believe this is a pilot and I get the team concept. Who is it? You, Christopher? Who is putting metrics together so that in 3 years or a year from now, what will the metrics look like and what does success look like so that in fact it keeps going strong, because mental health is an issue that first line responders like police officers deal with on a regular basis. So that's my first question to either of you, gentlemen, or the chief or the lieutenant.
So I'll jump in and take a stab at that. Thank you all again for inviting us. And I'll just say a plug. It's always good to have a boss who can publicly say he likes you. So thank you, Mark.
And it was recorded. It's just
and it was recorded. Yeah. So please send that over. We are definitely working with a contracted agency, CCSI, who's helping us to develop our metrics of determining what we should be appropriately looking at. So Mark said that one of our prongs was St. Vincent's Hospital, which has a crisis prevention response team already. And they have begun, based on that team model, to collect data that's going to be very similar to what the mobile crisis response teams are going to be collecting as well. So CCSI is going to be helping us build out what we should be looking for, but what does success look like? Number of the types of engagement, how fast we are engaging, the types of referrals that we're going to be making for mental health, substance use, whether it be medical, if a person's also, which wasn't mentioned, if somebody's experiencing an intellectual and developmental disability, that may also be present within the community. Reduction of hospital and ED utilization, that person staying in the community, less ED or emergency calls by people in the community that may be living with a mental health or co-occurring substance use disorder or any other type of complex need. Access to care, and how fast is a person getting an intake appointment, psychiatry appointment, and how long they are staying in treatment. So a lot of those are the different things that we are planning to look at as a measure of success, but also as Mark said, as we are going to be boots on the ground and out there in the field, we're absolutely going to be, there's going to be some gaps that are going to present themselves, and how fast we target and change and resolve some of those more larger systemic barriers for a person to access care so they don't frequently decompensate, become symptomatic, and have law enforcement contact. So, we're really looking at it holistically of how we're going to be, measuring, success.
In addition to that, let me just add in very quickly. When we began the 911 diversion initiative, we hit some bumps in the road. They went live on December 1st, 2021, and we hit a few glitches. As soon as we began to hear back from law enforcement communications personnel that there were glitches, we went right back to St. Vincent's Crisis Network team and began to work with them to say, let's meet on a regular basis to find out the snags that you're running into and the snags that we're running into on the opposite side of the fence so that we can have the best possible performance for the team. And we're going to be in that continuous mode of program improvement and process improvement throughout this.
So my second question is, my understanding, and when I heard the chief talk about this, and there was something a number of years ago, not similar to this, but the idea, the intention that is being described here is that I totally understand when somebody calls for help, and Mark, you spoke a lot about that, but I thought that the issue for the police, which put them at a, I think, highly uncomfortable position by their own accord, is that oftentimes it is neighbors or other family members, it is other adult individuals who are actually calling the police to have someone removed before something dangerous happens. Typically that, while the police, because they're available 7/24, 24/7, that they get called. Could you just describe briefly how this becomes helpful in that scenario, which I think is, if I heard it correctly, but you'll correct me if I'm wrong, is actually the majority of scenarios that put police sort of a little bit at odds. They're being called by a neighbor, an uncle, a parent, because of someone who, I'm not using the right term, but maybe out of control or dangerous to themselves or dangerous to others.
Yep. So one of the evidence-based practices that's put out through the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration is family psychoeducation. And many times when law enforcement, or even some of us on the crisis side of the fence, have gone out into the community and connected that person who's experiencing that meltdown, that crisis, having a difficult day, however you want to phrase it, oftentimes we don't spend enough time with the family to say, it would be really great if you took a little bit of an extra moment to make a phone call to Marie Considine, who runs the National Alliance for Mental Illness, or get connected with that Family Ties Resource Center. We want to help support families to live better with a person in their family who's struggling with mental illness. There obviously will be times in which there's conflict, but that's part of what the mobile crisis team is supposed to begin to resolve. And it's not a one and done. If it turns out that the Austin Police Department deploys a mobile crisis response team, they've de-escalated the person, they're going to follow up with that family for a period of up to 14 days to make sure that they've got the connections and they've got the services in place. So working with families with competing agendas as to who's going to stay in the home and who's not is always a challenge within any system. Our office also acts as a single point of access for housing, care management, assertive community treatment, and we hold what we consider our internal high-risk meeting every Friday, where we talk about those difficult cases. So if it turns out that a team is struggling with somebody and families are in crisis, we want to know about that so we can see what other resources we can rally to support that person within the community.
May I just add a little bit more to that? So there may be those family members or community members that they're not disconnected and they have that family member that's still in their home and they're calling, right? So then what does the chief and his team do? If it's a third party caller, meaning that now a mother or a brother calls on your uncle or a family member, they may not get enough information to be able to use the risk assessment tool to determine, hey, I can divert that call to the crisis network team, which would then spark or necessitate that law enforcement still deploy a car for a welfare check or to assist that family in crisis. What typically happens is before the MCRT was in place, well, officers would be going on their own with the enhanced training, yes, but then not be in a position to connect that person immediately to mental health care. That person may continue to de-escalate. There still may be family or community conflict, and that person will continue to be engaged. What the Austin Police Department and the catchment area will now have, if it is a third party caller and they go out into the community, they can then call on the MCRT through Family Services Westchester to co-respond with them. Law enforcement will secure the scene, make sure that everything is safe and everybody was safe, and then call in the team in that moment, any time of the day, to engage with that person, engage with the family, make connections, continue to de-escalate, and also to ensure that hopefully down the road, that person will not have to have criminal justice or law enforcement contact again. I, Chris John, as a first party caller, I were to call you, I can give you direct information. You would make a better assessment. Somebody in a community seeing somebody down the road acting differently may not have enough to really share with police. So now you have the team that can be that in the moment consult and support to law enforcement. We are a 9 to 5 operation in mental health. We can be there during the day to support law enforcement. After 5, it's usually law enforcement at their own devices. Friday at 4 or 5 o'clock, we're gone. They have to wait till Monday. Now you have the FSW team that are there 24/7 to be able to support law enforcement, engage them if they do have to be transported to the local hospital for evaluation for potential hospitalization, and work with those systems to better effect the most appropriate intervention, as opposed to the frustration of things didn't go with the way we expected and the person's in the community and we still have to re-engage until the more reactive mental health system comes on board during the working days.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm not, I mean, I have more. This is a fascinating topic. It's also because it's a bit new. There's some logistics. As we go into budgets, we're going to have to understand, you know, a lot of this involves the police department, all sorts of things, but I'm not sure that it's as important for me tonight to figure that. This is like a great start to the conversation. I'm so grateful that it's being approached by the county that has certainly a larger bank account than a village municipality, and it's really where it belongs at the county level. So I'm very grateful for all the work that's being done. Let me open it up, since this is a presentation, for any commentary by our own chief, Lieutenant Zimmerman, or any of the board members that have questions, comments, etc.
I'll just say that, look, I think that's a pretty thorough description of what it is. This was put on for discussion tonight because there is an agreement before the board so that we can get this started. So I'm hopeful that whatever questions are out tonight will be sufficient so that we can move forward and get this started. We're a little bit behind at this point from the other municipalities.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that, Chief. Important point. So I'm not going to speak again. So let me at least finish like you're right. What I need to say is whether I support it or not. Otherwise, it was good commentary. So I support on this. I've been very involved with Trustee Lopez, also on the police reform. We continue to be with the advisory group of such titles. So I'm in support of this, which is coming up later. I thank you, Chief, for the reminder. Anybody else have any comments, questions, thoughts?
I would just like
Hello,
to say
Dana.
that, I support this wholeheartedly. I think it's the best thing to come out of this reform process in ways, one of the best things, because this is an issue. And I know that in other parts of the country where they've already implemented these mental health crisis teams, and it's been really successful. And so I'm really kind of proud. I don't know, I'm glad Austin was selected to be kind of a location. And I'm looking forward to seeing it happen. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Dana White. And anybody else? We don't all need to comment. I'm just leaving it open for commentary.
I can go.
Please.
Thank you, Mark and Christopher, for joining us tonight. I have 2 questions. The first is to bring it to an issue that is in the headlines right now. One of the big conversations is around mental health and weapons. So I'm curious about how this specific alliance responds if someone calls and says, I have a concern about someone in my life that is showing distress. They either have diagnosed or undiagnosed mental health challenges and they have access to weapons. Does that go to the alliance? How does that interplay with the police? If you could say a little bit more about that.
Well, it depends. If it turns out that we end up with a person who is seen by a mental health professional, a psychiatrist, a registered nurse, a licensed clinical social worker, a psychologist, and they disclose that they're experiencing symptoms that may put them to be dangerous to themselves or other people. In that case, the clinician has a legal responsibility to report that to the New York State SAFE Act. that those New York State SAFE Act requests or reports come in through our office. We then send up the report to the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services, who does a search to see if the person has any permitted weapons. And then the person's asked to have the weapons removed from the home. If it turns out that they don't, then law enforcement will have the pistol permit division of the Department of Public Safety of Westchester County will rescind their pistol permit, then their weapons would be removed. That doesn't address long guns. It only talks about the licensed or registered firearms. So with long guns, there was an expansion of the extreme risk protection order, which is an expansion on the New York State SAFE Act, where a police officer, a school official, a family member can petition the court in the civil court process to limit that person's access to the firearms and limit their ability to purchase firearms at some point in the future. The odd thing about the extreme risk protection order is they did not involve the mental health system at all, and I'm okay with that. We don't need to be responsible for everything, but it did expand the level. Now, if it turned out that that call came in to the desk and one of Chief Sylvester's patrol commanders is listening to what's on the other end of the call, I wouldn't anticipate that tour commander would say, you know something, we need to get the mobile crisis response team out there right now. If there's a public safety issue, law enforcement should continue to do their business in the way they traditionally would do business. Once a scene is secure, if they've staged the mobile crisis response team to the side, mobile crisis team can then come in and provide that intervention for that person. We don't want to put people unduly at risk. The fact is, if Lieutenant Zimmerman's got the responsibility for the scene safety, he might not want to have additional civilians, the mobile crisis response team, coming into a high-risk scene. They're unknown variables. He's responsible and his team is responsible for the safety of the person in crisis, the safety of his officers, the safety of other people within the community. He might not want to have those unknown variables until the scene is secure and safe. Once we've got that person to the hospital, the New York State SAFE Act goes into effect. So all of this ties in together. And to tie it into the horrific tragedy that we saw down in Texas, that we took that moment of silence for, or the horror that we saw in Buffalo just within the past week. Well, we can't control everyone's behavior. I will say that from a mental health perspective, our system has not done a really great job of creating a system of care that supports people in a meaningful way. We want to begin to be more responsive to the needs of people within the community so that people don't remain isolated and boil over with that simmering hostility that we saw in both of those cases. I'm not necessarily an anti-Second Amendment guy. I believe that people have the right to bear arms, but we also need to have some responsibilities and need to be able to be responsive to our communities as well. So I see it as a real balance within this. That's the way I look at it.
I appreciate that. My second question, and then I'll have a quick comment and my thoughts on this as a whole. My second question is around the immigrant community here in Ossining. So I was heartened to hear that you said that there would be folks that were, I assumed Spanish speaking. You said that they were capable or fluent, yes. Right? Yeah, competent in language. I assume that means they speak Spanish. That's yes. Great. I think that that's super helpful. There is another piece of being able to serve, in particular, the Spanish speaking and immigrant community here in Ossining, which is on the messaging front. And so my question is, to what extent have you thought about that? And if you haven't already been thinking about or have the names of local organizations to partner with respect to that, whether it's Neighbors Link or Open Door or whatever else, those are great resources to go to. But would love to you to speak to the messaging piece, to the Spanish speaking and immigrant community.
So that we've actually worked pretty collaboratively with Neighbors Link over in the Mount Kisco community. And I know that there are a number of organizations that do provide outreach and messaging to people within the immigrant community. There's a catch to this as well. Most of the time, if it turns out that I was a person of Latinx origin, I'm probably not reaching out to the public mental health system for my care and my treatment. Odds are I would be reaching out to maybe my pastor or another trusted, credible messenger. Our department's been working with a number of faith leaders throughout the community with delivering soul shop workshops, bringing in pastors and imams and priests and Shinyan Buddhist priests to begin to have these discussions on how to access people who may not be traditionally served within the public mental health system. And that's really that's my answer for you. That's the way we've approached it. We've approached it in the past. But also in the past, when Chris and I were working on the care coordination program, we also recognized that we didn't necessarily, when we began to engage somebody, we also had to engage the guy who owned the local bodega. That person might be a really important person in the person who's at risk of going into crisis life. So we needed to make sure that we weren't looking at just the traditional resources, but the natural people within the community.
So as we began to talk about this, we really only talked about the MCRTs being a resource to specifically law enforcement, but in my development of the teams, it's an expectation that they also build relationships within the community. They have all been going out, talking to Neighbors Linked, Open Doors, any programs, communities and businesses, building those relationships, getting from them what are the specific needs that they have as well and what they're seeing so that they can begin to build out what are the specific preventative resources so that somebody does not have to call 911 within their crisis. We can resolve it before it escalates to that point as well. So that's another thing that they have been doing and they're expected to do.
Thank you very much. So my comment is that the last two massacres that we've had in this last week have been committed by people who were 18 years old. And so in addition to the populations we've been talking about, the youth is an incredibly important part of the conversation. We have our youth bureau and different opportunities to be able to make an impact there. I didn't include that as a question because part of what I also recognize is that the risk in the kind of work that you're doing is mission creep, right? It will range from folks that are having serious mental health issues all the way to folks experiencing anxiety and depression. And if you aren't experiencing anxiety and depression, you just must not be paying attention because who isn't experiencing depression and anxiety? It's a depressing and anxious time. So I don't want to put everything on you guys. I recognize you have a specific focus, but I did want to lift up the youth in particular as a vector for change. The last thing I'll say is that I fully support this, and anything that I can do to be helpful, I'm happy to do.
Thank you, Omar. I appreciate that. So let me also just add to answer that. Yes, they'll be working with adults, youth, young adults, the IDD population, and people with medical conditions. They're working towards getting certain certifications for CFTSS, Children and Family Therapy Support Services, so and other certifications as well. So the expectation is that they're working with all populations, not just a specific one.
Thank you. Anyone else? Manny, I see you unmuted.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I really don't have any questions. I mean, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for coming in front of us. Thank you for educating us. Thank you for helping our communities, not just here, but throughout Westchester. Is something that unfortunately is in need. It always has, and it always will be. For whatever reason, sometimes we are afraid to speak. We are afraid to express ourselves. We are afraid to say something, you know. And I'm hoping this will help break that barrier. This will help our police departments. This will help our community to open up in a different level. Sure. So I do appreciate that. And like I said, I don't have any questions. I'm humbled that you guys have come. I'm humbled that you guys have educated us on a lot of things. I mean, Omar asked the question that I was going to ask. So in regards to Spanish community, So yes, I'm in support of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My last, and I don't know if it's a question, a comment, or an observation. Chief, we get updates, regarding police reform. I think, if I'm not, it was Mark. I don't think it was Christopher. I think it was Mark that said it's part of, maybe it was even Maddie, part of the police reform initiative. So we need to just tie that back as far as our dashboard that we have on the website. Trustee Lopez and I are involved with police reform. We might want to speak to the chair to let them, I don't see any of the members when I just looked attending this, although it's recorded, they could look at it. But let's create some sort of a bridge to update both the board on where this piece is going, update Jamie the information on the website that a presentation was had about this topic, because this was one of the pieces on the bottom that the village said it doesn't feel it can wrap its arms around something this magnanimous, but the county or the state might be able to, and here it's happening. So I just like to sort of tie or at least build a bridges connectivity to those topics as we move forward, not for tonight, but as we move forward. It's something to think with the police working hand in glove with police reform. This is part of that. It's not the only part, but it certainly came up in the conversation. Okay, well, I'm hearing support for it. We have a quorum, so we can move forward after this meeting, I assume, Stuart, for the resolution that the chief had mentioned, yes?
There'll be a resolution on for June 1st, Mayor. Thank you.
Oh, for June 1st, I'm sorry. Okay,
Yes.
thank you. The trustee for
Thank you. It's really been a privilege to be able to present this and to look to partner with you all. It really is, we're really excited about working with the Aspen Police Department in the broader village and broader community. So we appreciate it.
Well, you're working with the best police department from that whole list that you gave us. I'm not biased, but I believe that to be true. So thank you, all of you. And again, I offer the same thing I offered the supervisor who did not take me up on it. You're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but we understand if you can't. Maddie.
Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Mark. That was certainly a lot to take in, but again, very grateful for your contributions and for being with us. The next agenda item is also related to the Police Reform and Reinvention Initiative from 2020. This is proposed local law number 1 of 2022 that I will turn over to Stuart, the chief, and the lieutenant.
Thank you, Maddie. Good evening, folks. At last week's regular meeting during continuing business, there was a discussion of the revisions that were made to proposed local law 1. Those revisions based upon comments from the members of the Police Reform Advisory Committee, as well as input from members of the Board of Trustees. The proposed local law has been provided to the chief, to Lieutenant Zimmerman, and this is more an opportunity to hear from them with regard to issues that they have with regard to the revised proposed local law. So I'd like to turn the floor over to both of them so that the board can hear their comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. I'm going to speak sort of broadly from an overview, and Lieutenant Zimmerman runs internal affairs, so he'll speak more to the specifics of this. I don't think it's any secret that I wasn't in favor of this. I spoke pretty plainly about it during police reform. The model we have has been the example to most of the rest of Westchester County. It included peer accountability, which is a unique concept that I don't think good policing exists without. Removal of police officers from the board makes it an us versus them, where everybody that comes to these meetings will commend the police department for what we are and what everybody else wishes their departments were. So I'd really love to maintain that forward trajectory, albeit within whatever the board chooses to do with this. There's a number of problems in my mind with the way this is laid out, and a number of questions as well. I wholeheartedly believe that an outside investigator is the wrong move. I'm not really sure how that would even work. In general terms, outside investigators, to the best of my knowledge, don't have the authority to order employees to answer questions. So There'd have to be some mechanism in place for employees to be obligated to participate in those investigations. There's also a lot of conflicts in the law where it mentions that at some point, the objective of the CCRB was for the police department to complete an investigation. The CCRB would review that investigation and see if they came to the same conclusion. There are references in this law still to the police department doing an investigation. I don't know where that goes or what the purpose of it is, because it's no longer considered by the CCRB. It would only be an outside investigator. I'd imagine it's going to be a financial hardship to undertake that altogether. I think that we have a model that works. I think it's worked for 22 years. I think that we've been an example to others, and I think change for the sake of change would be a mistake. But again, these are things that I've all shared multiple times, so I'm not looking to beat a dead horse. I'll let Aaron talk more about the specifics of the code.
Okay, so just to be clear, you have said before, the board has already moved on and approved what it has approved. It's gone through many reiterations. I'm hoping that tonight we are now on the law, and I think Lieutenant Zimmerman, the law we had hoped come out in January of 2022, thus LL1. We've already moved on to more LLs. So I'm hoping that you share some specific concerns. Maybe there's some resolution, maybe there's some adjustments, maybe there aren't, so that we can move forward on the will of the board and where the board is going. So awaiting your sort of, where do you see issues, and do you have any solutions or resolutions to the issues?
Well, like you mentioned, is this the final draft of everything that would be put forward, or is this is it?
Maybe I can answer that, Mayor.
Please.
Lieutenant, we're not there yet.
Okay.
I've expressed some of my concerns to the board. There are, as the chief has pointed out, still some internal inconsistencies, particularly as relate to the external investigation. So the best way to say it is this: you're commenting on a draft. So I think that's the best way to do it, because based upon your comments and what the board directs me, we go from there. So that's why I think it's important to hear from your end. The board is aware I've also sent this to the PBA to get any comments from them. But at this point, you folks are here, so whatever you got, I think the board would like to hear.
Right. Well, I guess, I mean, aside from some discussion on, certain definitions and procedure that I think can be ironed out, maybe just for clarity. But I guess the biggest thing is the, proposed implementation of an outside investigator conducting the investigations into civilian complaints that are made against the police officers here. As it stands right now, as the commanding officer of the detective division, one of my functions is internal affairs. So that being said, I don't know if my opinion or my input into how that would work would be useful, but that hasn't happened yet. So I was just curious if there'd been any consideration to who the outside investigators might be and how that process would go about selecting them. What criteria would they have to meet to be even considered for that position? Would they be civilian? Would they be other law enforcement? Would it be ex-law enforcement? Who's going to pay for it? That kind of stuff.
I'd like to take one thing off the table in this conversation in its entirety. The issue of cost is off the table. Okay, this is not a decision based on cost. So let me take that just off the table. Let the trustees worry about costs on behalf of the public that they represent. That not being a barrier, the other issues, let's discuss.
Okay.
But I really would prefer not to have a conversation about cost. I actually, I gave a formula last time. It says if you look at what lawyers charge and use that and say you need 100 hours of something because you get right now you get about a handful of cases, I think, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe you get a handful. If that number doubles, you'll have 2 handfuls. That's a dozen. If I had a lawyer look at it at the price they charge, I could probably do a back of the envelope guesstimate to place into a budget. I mean, I think wouldn't you agree that's a fair statement? If we had to pay a lawyer to do it, whatever it is. So I don't think the budgets, this idea of referring to budgets without anyone actually knowing what it would cost is something we should worry about. What we should worry about is the other things you're talking about. I think we need to really clarify and say, okay, how do we choose the person? Who are they? What is the role of the current police? These are totally wonderful questions, and I want to tackle those. I just want to take one thing off the table.
Okay, yeah, we don't have to talk money. That's fine.
Aaron, let
And
me
don't
just-
worry about it.
So, I mean, we can go top to bottom with this. I mean, I think if we start with definitions, there's some things that are concerning to us in the definitions. Substantiated obviously makes sense in that by a preponderance of credible evidence, it establishes that a thing in fact happened. Fine. In terms of unfounded, by a preponderance or credible evidence determines that the alleged acts in the complaint did not occur. Fine with that. When you get to unsubstantiated, it says that if by a preponderance of the credible evidence, the CPCRB determines that the alleged acts in a complaint constitute a violation of the department's rules, regulations, and procedures, but there's insufficient evidence to establish by a preponderance of the credible evidence the alleged acts occurs. Quite frankly, this reads a lot as if somebody's done something wrong and we just merely can't cross the bridge to prove that it happened, when in fact, that's not what unsubstantiated really is intended to mean. Unsubstantiated means that there's an allegation and there's not sufficient evidence. We live in a world where you're innocent until proven guilty. This doesn't say you did it and we can't prove it. It should just say unsubstantiated is there is insufficient evidence to establish by a preponderance that the alleged acts occurred. That's it. Not that it occurred and it's a violation and we can't prove it. I think it oversteps. That's one thing that was concerning.
Okay, Stuart, you caught that? I'm trying to follow on my version as I'm looking at it.
I'm writing it down. I'll also get the transcript from when it comes through, and I'll watch it. So I'll be
Okay,
in a
thank
better
you, because I'm
position.
trying to follow. And Chief, if you could just give me exactly where you're looking, because I'm looking at 2 screens and I have it on my.
Mayor, we're on the I think, Chief, we were on the definitions, and this was, so this would be section 8.4, which is definitions, and the chief was referring to unsubstantiated.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hold on, I've got to see where we're rolling down to after that one. Obviously, you know, I've mentioned the removal of police officers. I think that that is something that should be reconsidered. In terms
That's
of
the voting part. So when you say removal, you mean the voting part, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, the vote, not the removal of.
I mean, in terms of there's things that talk here about confidentiality of members and removal. I mean, quite frankly, those things sound nice, but the odds of somebody being removed, because we're allowing people to do these meetings by Zoom, there's absolutely no way to determine that someone doesn't have family, friends, neighbors, whoever they want sitting on and watching. I'm also not sure how we share documents and then take them back from people. And I have concerns for the privacy of both the officers involved and the complainants. It's not far-fetched to imagine that the person sitting on the CCRB right now could have gotten overzealous with a particular complaint and went out and called that complainant because they felt like they weren't having their way. These things can happen. You know, I think that we put these things in here, and when we talk about trust, there's not a whole lot that anything can be done to prove that people aren't going to be sharing those. And if they do, keep in mind, these are volunteers. There's absolutely no consequence to these folks because they're not employees. Much the same way police officers, their careers on the line. In terms of training, I can't understand how someone would go through only 4 topics and then just decide that they can judge anything. You know, a judgment in the CCRB against you can determine your credibility and essentially ruin your career, even if you're not terminated. For somebody to not have to have all of the training before judging a complaint and then be able to put a finding against me to a point where I can no longer testify in criminal court under 245.25(1) of this criminal procedure law, all of these things are going to have to be turned over to defense counsel for disclosure. I think it's a bit much to say that we're in a big rush to have a judgment against you and training is going to come second. Because certainly we've talked about police officers that training is the big thing, and we can't put a cop on the street until they're trained. You know, I'm not really sure how we come to a point where we're in such a rush to judge those cops that the folks judging them shouldn't be trained. This model cuts out a vast majority of the training and allows for only a few topics to be done. it eliminates most of what they would have to know before before actually hearing complaints. There's a lot here in consultation with the chief. I'm not sure to what extent the board intends to enforce that, but the CCRB, for a while, I wasn't permitted to interact with, and now when I do, I hear from only Stuart. So if that's something that should probably be discussed. In terms of requirements of board
That's
members,
actually not in here. It's also inaccurate. I'm not going to have a conversation with you about that statement. I will say for the public record that is inaccurate, and I'm going to move on from that statement. But Stuart, I think what we do need to think about, and it may be in there from other people's point of view, is the involvement of the chief, which I think is actually clearly statement that chief of police, or I guess he could have somebody in his stead. It depends on how we look at it and whether that has to be stated or if it's a given. So I could always have a trustee go in my stead. I don't know if that's the same thing for chief of police. Let's say turning something over and saying, you know, Lieutenant Zimmerman is my person for this, and therefore he functions as I do. So I think that's a question mark that we just need to put out there so we have a greater understanding.
I'm not sure what was inaccurate, but if you're not interested in discussing now, if you could let me know later, I'd love to know.
Your statement that you're not allowed to speak is inaccurate, and I'm not
But
discussing
there was
it.
a time when I
but
wasn't allowed to, and I didn't say that. I said that's since changed, but I still have no I don't hear from the CCRB for anything. I don't contact them unless they've contacted me, but there is very little, if any, interaction. I only hear from Stuart.
Okay, but we're back to this law and what it says and what it doesn't say and what's missing, because now we are looking, as you said, from top to bottom. So I want to stay with what are the words being used here, what are problematic, and what and if there is commentary either by you or Lieutenant Zimmerman to different words that can be used that would make this better, that would be helpful in moving this forward.
Right. What I'm pointing out, it says in consultation with the chief, and I don't feel that that's happened. That's what I'm saying. So I'm suggesting to the board that they should consider exactly what you consider to be consultation or what role I would play. I think that needs to be better defined because I don't think anybody knows what that means.
Okay, that's a fair statement, Stuart. That goes in as like putting some parameters, whether it's about timing, whether it's about meetings, whether it's about updates, whether it's about like, what would that look like?
Understood,
So there's
Mayor.
an understanding. So I
Got it.
think that is very helpful.
Sure.
Hang on one second here, just roll down and see what the next thing was. So the next thing, I guess what we're really getting into is this concept of an outside investigator.
But where are you on that? What number are we on?
It's page 16 of 22. It covers a whole lot of this 8-12, I guess, would be scope of review.
Scope, I think it's under scope of review.
Section 8 to 8, the revised as section 8-12, Mayor.
8-12, let me get.
And it's entitled scope of review. Thank you, Lieutenant.
Okay,
And it's in, it looks like maybe,
It starts with B, I believe, which is where it really shows, you know, which is there.
okay.
yeah,
So there's a lot to unpack here. First, people that are investigators are the vast majority that I know retired cops. For being really clear about how we got to this point, it's been complaints that policing is historically a problem. So it's sort of mind-boggling to me that we would consider bringing someone back who essentially would have been the problem to begin with. I like to believe that with each generation of cops, we get that much better. I believe the people that taught me how to do this job were good people. I think we do it better than they do. I suspect the folks that come after us will be a step better than us. Hiring an outside investigator who's a retired cop is a step backwards. You know, in picking these folks, what qualifications? I mean, if it's not a retired cop, then to what extent are people certified or skilled or trained to investigate something? You know, I really don't know where this investigator is going to be coming from and who they are. I mean, we have people here right now, and I think that it really speaks to the public trust, the board's trust, my trust in who we assign to investigate the people that work here. I think I've shown an incredible propensity to investigate my own people and take action when necessary. We've done incredibly thorough investigations on all of our folks, and we've taken action, probably more during my time than most before me. So, I got to be honest, it's not to take it personally, but the idea that we're incapable of this. First off, I think we're proven. I don't think anybody can debate the fact that this police department has investigated thoroughly, effectively, and to that end, brought discipline against a number of police officers where it was warranted. Bring in an outside counsel, bring an outside investigator. Outside of the fact that somebody wants that, I'm not really sure where the police department being removed from that duty comes from. Overall, the discussion of an outside investigator here really effectively describes the job of the chief of police. What it says is that this person is going to investigate the complaint. They're going to be recommending discipline. Again, if it's not somebody with experience in policing, I don't know what grounds they would have to be recommending discipline. It literally describes my job. So I'm not sure if it's just a matter of trust that people don't trust me. If they don't, I think there needs to be a discussion about that. If the idea is simply that we should hire somebody else to do the job, I'd submit to you that what this describes then is a commissioner. If the chief can't do it and we hire somebody else, but this becomes a slippery slope. If I can't be trusted, we have to hire somebody else. As soon as they're investigating cops, we then can't trust them because they're investigating cops and we need somebody beyond them. And we can just keep creeping further and further away from the government, but somebody has to be capable and responsible of doing this. There is a check and balance here. This entire system was designed so that the internal affairs investigator investigates, presents, the CCRB gets to review that investigation. If they disagree, they send it to the Board of Trustees. To the best of my knowledge, at least in the last 15 years that I've been aware of the workings of this, I'm not aware of that ever happening. So, while people can say that there's issues with trust, I don't know how an entity exists for 15 years. And look, we can bring back the people outside of Carlos Castro, and I think one or two people that have moved away. Most of them are still around. And they can tell you about what their experiences have been. And I think they were good people. They were picked by boards of trustees prior to this. So I'm just concerned that bringing in an outside investigator at the cost of discrediting all the work that people have done before that, or for the mere purpose of creating the appearance of something that's already there. I think we've got a good police department. Everywhere we go, we keep hearing people say that we're the example. This really takes my entire job. If I'm not tasked with overseeing police officers, I'm not sure, other than paying bills, what it is that I do here. And the description of the investigator in this particular section of code really does take away all of the accountability measures that a police chief is supposed to have. There's nothing in here that tasks this mentions still that I'm to do an investigation, but as far as the CCRB and the village board is concerned, no one's ever going to see my investigation because it's only their investigation. And then there is a reference that if the board doesn't like the investigation by the outside investigator, they should tell me about it. But then it doesn't say what I should do about it, because ultimately they're going to order that person to do more investigation. I'm not sure what a chief is if the chief isn't tasked with holding their own people accountable.
Okay. Again, I think we've discussed this. I think that there is a reason a committee was set up. I think that it is not about trust. It might be your definition, and you've carried a logical argument, which I totally understand your argument. The argument, however, starts in a place that some folks don't agree with, which is that organizations of any kind, institutions of any kind, should not be monitoring and judging themselves when complaints, whether it's a police department, the local hospital, or anybody else. Institutions doing their own disciplinary action within their structure is not, in my opinion, personally, and about the trust element as it is about looking at the overall picture of how this could be done in a way that does work with the police department, not instead of, in the way that your journey carries it, but in concert with. So the question is, I understand the issue that you have. What I'm not really hearing is a solution, except a solution says, this doesn't really work. Except I think Stuart, if I heard some points correctly, I may have, I may not have. And I disagree that this is a chief of police. It's nothing personal to you or any other chief, but a chief of police, this is not their job in its entirety. It is their job, it's part of their job, maybe, But I do think that the idea here is that they work with the investigator, not exclusive of, or not instead of. One would think that the investigator, a third party, would be working with all parties concerned and not just with one party. I mean, that usually is why third party are hired. We have hired in personnel issues, oftentimes, third party participants exactly for the purpose of objectivity. No one ever saw anything wrong with that. It wasn't a comment on the village manager. It wasn't a comment on the employee. It wasn't a comment on the lawyer. It wasn't a comment on a committee. It was a format used oftentimes in objectivity. So the thing that I did glean from this, Stuart, is what a layman's term is the so what, right? So who starts and who stops, and in a sense, what is the accountability? Okay, so what are the parameters for an outside investigator? There were people who were talking about, and there's a national organization about this, that you hire ex-cops. The chief believes that ex-cops, that every generation, if I got this right, of police is actually better. So you're not hiring a more and better qualified person. That is beyond me, whether a person who comes from a generation of police from the past is worse than a person who comes from today's police force. I wouldn't know. I would think that that is an individual thing. You could argue that about almost every industry, I guess, if you wanted to. It all depends on your point of view. But I do think the parameters is something you might want to highlight that has to be delineated more clearly, is something I gleaned from it. I'm only speaking, I'm sure Trustee Lopez will have comments at the end, but I want us to sort of move through this. And some of these things have been discussed, so I see this more as like some clarity, which is, Stuart, what you asked for tonight, is what might be some resolutions, how might I fix this? And Lieutenant Zimmerman, you're also, of course, welcome to chime in. I don't mean to cut you off. It seems that that's something, the delineation of who might be a third party investigator. Is it all of the above? Is it, you know, it could be an attorney who does labor relations. Is it an ex-police officer? Is it like, do any of them qualify? If not, what might be the qualification? Does that need to be in the legislation? I'm not sure that's a detail that's needed in the legislation, but maybe Stuart, you can enlighten us at some point whether it needs to be in it or not.
Well, go ahead, go ahead, Lieutenant. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just curious because correct me if I'm wrong, but I was under the impression that, you know, this element of the, you know, revised legislature wasn't, the board was not in favor of an outside investigator previously. And now it's in here and it says that the board is in favor of this. Is that now the case, or was that not the case?
That is correct.
Is the board in favor of an outside investigator doing
The
this?
majority board is in favor of a third party. That happened a month or so ago, because we do have an advisory committee that was established and started in 2022. Part of their role is to look at this piece of legislation, give their comments. I believe they had 8 major categories that they would like us to rethink, that they disagree with, or that they agree with parts and not others. And we talked about that. It's all recorded in one of our meetings, and we changed, I think, in the majority vote. I don't remember if it was unanimous. I apologize. Some were unanimous, some were majority. All of them were majority, I think, of like a 4-1. I don't think it was a close call, but I may be corrected. Regardless, we just need a majority. And so this thing about having a third party under Chairperson Jackie Shaw, who then presented a point of view that made sense to us, and also realized that a year has passed since we've done this work, and other communities now have added some thought to this. And so we're able to sort of see what others are doing. And we now have an advisory committee that was established. And so that piece from the one you may be referring to has been changed. That's correct.
Okay.
I just want to take you on the journey of how that happened and when
All
it
right.
happened.
I mean, if that is the case, which it sounds like it is, I wish I was part of that process, having been doing this now for a few years.
So Lieutenant, if I can jump in, I think it would be helpful to give for folks that may be just tuning in and trying to get a sense of putting all this into context, a very short understanding of how we got to this point. We have Executive Order 203 that's ordered by the governor. We put together a committee of people to help put together the report. We hire a consultant. It results in a report. We send the report to Albany. And then we start actually putting this report into action, the recommendations in there. Many of them are things that are very easy to do. Some of them take a long time, but there's a bunch of them that have to do specifically with the Civilian Police Complaint Review Board. That group of recommendations is sent to the CPCRB for their comments. There's some initial draft legislation made about what that should look like. It goes to the board for comments. This is all last year, all of this kind of back and forth.
Yeah, I was following it. Yeah.
Right. So then we have this legislation that we're kind of ready to roll out in the beginning of this calendar year, which is why it's the first local law. But it also coincided with the creation of this police reform advisory committee. And so the idea was, okay, before we move forward with this thing, let's show the local law to them, see if they have any comments. They provided their comments. It resulted in, the mayor said, 8 recommendations. Great. So now we have the CPCRB's thoughts. We have the Police Reform Advisory Committee, which is ostensibly representation of the public and their thoughts. A big piece that is missing and that has been missing is the police perspective. Both police leadership and PBA, I'm speaking for myself, would love to have, in the same way that the Police Reform Advisory Committee said, okay, here are our 8 changes that we would make prioritized, and here's the rationale for why. Some of those changes we said, those are logical and make sense, let's go with those. Some of those, there was more conversation. One of them, the outside investigator, was one where the Police Reform Advisory Committee felt very strongly about wanting to have an outside investigator. The Civilian Police Complaint Review Board, there was, I would say, it wasn't unanimous, but there was support there for an outside investigator, but that wasn't unanimous. Then it comes to the board, and the reality is that as a board, we're not in those conversations when the CPCRB is having discussions about specific complaints. So we can't say, hey, the way that it's working now doesn't work. It would work better with an outside investigator. We don't know. We're not in those conversations. We're not allowed to be in those conversations. So we just take what the CPCRB says and take that into account. Then we hear, okay, if we do bring in an outside investigator, the complaint that the PARC had of the police are investigating themselves. The problem is that there's the actual facts of the matter, which are exactly what the chief described. There is no evidence that there has been, and Stuart has made this point basically every time we have this conversation, that any investigation that has happened has there's been an issue with it, where there's been impropriety or some sort of very obvious bias that has resulted in the investigation not going well. That has not been the case. The chairperson of the CPCRB, she has some slight disagreement with that statement, but I believe it stands to be true that all the investigations have been done fairly. Nevertheless, the perspective that the PARC brought was essentially the argument that we hear when it comes to when does a trustee need to recuse themselves. It's when there is actual or perceived moments where we may be self-interest may be influencing the way that we vote. And so the idea is we're supposed to recuse ourselves in those cases. I think similarly here, there's the actual facts of the matter, and then there's just the perception of if someone from the police department, in this case yourself, is investigating a colleague, then you see this person in the lunchroom and at the retirement party and all around. And to what extent does that ongoing relationship influence one's ability to have as reduced bias as possible investigation? That was the point that they were making. And so, and everybody will remember that I said this. I said, I don't know what the police would say in response to this. My sense is that they would say, and then I said whatever I said. But what I would love is to have specific police perspective as to what the arguments are against an outside investigator. My personal perspective is that the way that it's working now is the way that it should work. That's my personal perspective. But I recognize that we were a little bit at an impasse because you have people that the Board of Trustees are not in those conversations, have no idea what's going on in the CPCRB deliberations of actual complaints. And then you have a group of folks from the community wanting to make this change. So what I presented was perhaps a way forward was, okay, what if we do the outside investigator for a limited amount of time as a pilot to see how it works? And if it works and if it goes well, then we keep it. And if not, then we don't. That was the proposed solution. We packed that all up, put it into the newest, shiniest version of Local Law 1, which is what you have in front of you. Now you're presented to us. Here are the thoughts that we have. Eager I am to hear what those are, because then we can have a substantive conversation in terms of, are we really talking about just like a difference in philosophical approach of, do you believe that the police can investigate themselves with enough controls that whatever natural bias would exist when you're working with people and investigating them as well won't show up as an issue, versus the opposite of that opinion? That's the context. And so that's why Stuart says that this is a draft. So whatever commentary you can add, experiences that you can speak to, details, specifics, we are thirsty for that because we haven't had a ton of it, particularly on the police perspective.
Yeah, I think we were just waiting for our turn to weigh in and, provide our 2 cents into, how this may or may not work. Like you said, if it was any thought brought to the table as far as how it would work from either the CPCRB or the PARC of how that selection process would go, who would do the investigation? I mean, I guess we'll start there.
Yeah, so there was some initial thoughts of the mayor mentioned, might it be a lawyer of some kind? The most frequent suggestion is a retired police officer or someone else. What I suggested was having essentially, if we are going to go down this path, essentially having like an RFP and saying, hey, we're looking for an investigator for police issues. And in this case, my personal perspective would be that anybody would be able to submit an RFP, including OPD. And then if we looked at all of the responses and said, hey, of this lawyer, of this retired police officer, and then of OPD, here are all their qualifications, here's how they responded, whatever, who's the best positioned, then we could still go with OPD if it turned out that that was the best option. We weren't boxing ourselves into what feels like an inferior option, but we didn't get into those specifics. It did not get that detailed. So we don't know is the headline.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it just seems, from my perspective looking in and just reading this over the past week, that if the outside investigator were to be, let's say, just, a police officer from a different agency or entity, is that really changing anything as far as perspective is concerned with law enforcement investigating law enforcement?
In my understanding of the crux of the concern, it's not really law enforcement and investigating law enforcement, but specifically colleagues investigating colleagues. So that if it were, even if it were, no, that's not true. If it were a retired auditing person, I was going to say, but then you still have the same bias. The point is that it's a person that has the content knowledge, but then isn't going to be stepping into a potential interpersonal challenge because you're investigating someone that you sit next to every day. That's the crux of the thought.
Right. I mean, I haven't been here as long as some others, but as long as I've been here, I've never seen that become an issue in my experience here. I think it's good practice that, one could keep order of their own house. And I think it goes a long way with morale and the the outlook the men and women of the police department may have as, you know, how they feel that they may be viewed by others in the village, you know? I think that plays a big part into it.
I think that that's a totally fair perspective. As far as I see it, what it looks like it may ultimately come down to is what specific board members' perspectives are on what do you more highly value or prioritize. Do you more highly value what the CPCRB and PARC and folks that have some other folks from the community have commented in different ways as well, in saying if your point is to try to have as much trust in the system as possible, or to have as much belief that we're doing our best to reduce bias in policing and all this, having an outside investigator is going to be a solution to that problem, versus the argument that functionally that you just made, which is we haven't historically had a problem. This is a solution chasing a problem. It has a bunch of second and third order effects that we aren't contending for, and so forth. Are we just changing something to change it without thinking about what the fundamental difference is going to be? So it may ultimately come down to that. I do want to move to one quick other piece.
Omar,
here.
can
I
just say
do.
one-
I
Omar,
want
can
to
just-
also,
Please, please.
excuse me, I want to also mention that you may have said it quickly, because there is this issue of balance, right? We don't know what we don't know. There's more of a theory than maybe a practice. And all the conversations, Lieutenant, that you just brought up have been like sort of discussed. That is the reason the board is putting it in as a trial basis and would like to have some metrics at the end to say, you know what? We're fine with this, or we're not fine with this, or this didn't do the act any better. It didn't work any better than what we had before. So the idea was to actually go with a trial balloon. I think a year was chosen. This is part of the date, and there was conversation about that as well. So I'd like you to mull that over as well, because I think that Trustee Lopez said it a bit quickly, and maybe that was missed, maybe it wasn't.
No,
don't know.
I mean, it states it quite clearly here on a, you know, pilot program. I'm well aware of that. I just wanted to dive into maybe the logistics of how that would work,
Okay.
because, you know, it just says pilot program and that the board is in support of it. But I would have loved to have been part of the conversation to see how it might work, even to provide, you know, constructive input into how it could be done. You know, because you're taking into consideration the views, and I'll go out on a limb and say opinions of the CPCRB and the PARC. What background, what's driving their, you know, how are they coming to their conclusions to make that decision? What qualifications do they have to put that forward?
I think that that's a totally fair statement. And I think that the question that the mayor had near the beginning of this conversation to Stuart gets to what you just asked, Lieutenant, which is I certainly am unclear about what is the level of detail that needs to be in local law 1 when it comes to an outside investigator. It may be that we just have the language that's in there, and then what we're talking about is a separate document, or is a separate, or it may be that all that level of detail is in there. I think ultimately we do need to figure all that out, and it may be that we figure it out before rather than after.
Yeah, I'd hope so.
Yes, yeah. Irrespective of when, and I hope it's before rather than after, you certainly should be a key part of that conversation. So take this as your formal invitation to participate in the creation of what that looks like, because you're already doing the investigation. So there are pieces of what that looks like that you're going to know that we wouldn't know, and that even Stuart wouldn't know just from research or whatever.
I'll accept.
So that is why our attorney always says the same thing, right? Until you put it in writing and almost into a local law way, it's hard for people to focus, because it's a lot of input, output, and changes occur, and they're supposed to occur. This is actually the process of how laws is made. But at some point, he has to put things in writing, and he pushed us and said, look, there's still some disagreements. This, we're in May, we're at the end of May, right? So it's not like it's not being taken seriously. On the contrary, it's actually been taken very seriously. So as Trustee Lopez said, this is the invitation. This is why you guys were asked for the meeting. We are reading this, read it line by line, circle and redline and ask the questions and give us some answers as well, right? The folks on these committees are appointed, but they're members of a community. They represent a larger community. That's their purpose. That's what committees do. There is nothing that excludes the police from also looking at this as members of the community, especially the way we hire police, which is predominantly local, and say, okay, this is how I would recommend it. If the only comment is, I don't like this, I don't believe in it, here's why, that's fine. If, however, there's a comment that says, okay, assuming that I would accept it, here is the issues that I see, here are the hurdles, here is how I might solve it if I were you. Here are some ideas I have for you. That would be really helpful as well, so that you are part of the creator of what this looks like. And when I say you, I mean you could ask other police officers, that's up to you. You might look at other places and how they do, if you so desire. I'm simply saying you could be part of the creator. If you look at sentences and say, I simply don't agree with this won't work, then the conversation sort of ends there, and we would ask why not. But if you could look at it at some of these pieces and say, all right, I'm not loving it, but I could sort of understand, but this is how I would do it if I were you, that too would be helpful. I mean, I'm just throwing some options out there because that's how I would do it. So that we can actually look at this and learn from what you know, because you are a person that has been involved in it and sits with this every day.
I just want to bring up two quick other points. I can feel energy stores depleting rapidly. And so I want to make sure that there are enough in the tank here so that we can get to these very important points that the chief made.
Please.
So one is about training. So I think that the challenge that we have with training is that the CPCRB is reviewing the complaints that are investigated currently by OPD about sitting officers, and then making a recommendation or determination is the language, making a determination about whether that complaint is, and then what the definitions are, substantiated, unsubstantiated, whatever. Let's say that a complaint is substantiated, which is like the most serious one. They're saying like, this person complained, their investigation happened, and we're saying like, yeah, for sure, the police officer did something wrong. Then it comes to us. Irrespective of what the CPCRB does, they don't have any ability to, maybe they can make recommendations or something, but they can't actually make any changes to any police officer's status. Fire them, put them on leave, nothing. They can do none of those things. The Board of Trustees can. And the observation that the CCPRB, the PARC, and any number of people have made is that to be a Board of Trustees member, the amount of training required is exactly 0, right? So we actually are the ones that determine who the chief is going to be. We confirm police promotions and all. We 0 training, right? So we don't even know anything, and we can make the determination, yes, this is substantiated and you're suspended or fired or whatever. Now, one can make the argument, maybe we should get some training about a whole number of things, but the situation as it stands is that it requires no training. Okay, so that we can choose to either stay with the recommendation that's in there, which is the 4 topics to start, and then I forget exactly what it is, and then growing to the rest. But to me, the bigger picture is that we want them to be as well trained as possible, but we also have to recognize that there's that irony that we're making this determination having 0 training ourselves. And so people like Trustee White are raising their hand saying, I want to be a part of the training, I want to learn. I think that's great. We should all learn as much as possible. But I just want to point out that larger piece of the context.
Well, I don't want to speak out of turn, Chief, but I'd I'd be more than willing to teach you guys anything you want to learn, and that goes for, the members in the CPCRB as well. If some of the training is in need of refreshment. And then, and I mean, one of the things that I know we've all been struggling with over the past 2 years is what we're doing right now, having these conversations over, Zoom on the computer. And, when the CPCRB old regime was out and the new regime kind of came in, we got smacked in the face with COVID, and then everything was on a, molasses in February pace, being conducted over Zoom, not in person. And hopefully things get back to normal with training and meetings, because there's an element to this that unless you've done it, there's a tangible element to this and the training that's been missed. And it's crucial. I can't emphasize that enough. There's such a tangible element to the training and also the meetings, some of the presentations of these things. There's an effect that's missing that I think is valuable, that's being lost over Zoom. And, I would welcome the time when we can get back to doing it in person. And I think that the benefits of that will significantly outweigh any risk or any direction this has been put in because of that missing element over the past 2 years. I really think that we'd be in a different place right now had that not have been a factor, and we could have done a lot of this in person. It's a missed opportunity for, relationships to be built and, personalities to be defined and, really come together as a collaborative unit rather than just, talking to cameras on the screen. There really is something lost. And I think everyone knows what I'm talking about. And I'm sure it's affected other things in workplaces. It's not mutually exclusive to this, but I definitely think it's a vital component to pushing this in the right direction and moving forward. And, believe me, like I said, I don't want to speak for the chief, but speaking from my perspective as the investigator that handles 99% of these things, I'm not opposed just to say no. I just want to be part of the process. And I think that's the part that's been missing all along, is just, not being invited to sit down at the table to discuss these things. And I think that had that been the case, and now moving forward from this point on, I think things can, I think we can get good work done.
I appreciate that, Lieutenant. That's a lot of fair thoughts. The very last piece that I wanted to throw out there, I wanted to direct it to Stuart. It's a point that the chief made around Zoom privacy, the privacy of the officer and the complainants, document privacy. Mayor, I don't know if you meant to be muted, but I don't know. Oh, there you are. You're back. So, Stuart, if there's anything that exists anywhere, whether it's legal proceedings that happen over video conference, anything else that is highly sensitive that folks have found, what are ways of dealing with the fact that you can meet remotely but also hold confidentiality, and here's some of the mechanisms that ensure confidentiality for folks that may have concerns about confidentiality, which I think are fair. And anything that may be out there with respect to that, I think will be helpful to address those concerns.
It's a very fair point the chief raises. I do know that other larger municipalities in the state have been conducting their civilian review meetings via Zoom. That said, how confidentiality is maintained is not something I can answer at this point. I just don't know. So it has to be, but it's a very fair point that the chief has raised. Another point the chief has raised, which I think has sort of gone under the radar here, but it's very important. where other municipalities have recently enacted changes to their civilian police complaint review boards. The most, City of Rochester comes to mind, City of Geneva is another. They have both found that their local laws have effectively been thrown out by the courts. And a large part because the courts have found that the discipline role has effectively been shifted from the administration to an independent individual or agency. As you are all aware, we work here under the Westchester County Police Act, which specifically delineates how discipline is to occur. And I think it's important that when we have a final version, and if that version is to include an outside investigator, that it's exceptionally clear what that person's role is. And I mention this because the current law that we work under now actually has, and I pointed this out in a memo that I sent earlier, has a significant error in it because it says in the code now, the decision as to whether to pursue disciplinary charges shall be the village board's. That's absolutely incorrect. This board does not have the decision to pursue disciplinary charges. That's the chief's, always has been. Your decision is to hear the disciplinary charge. So there's a difference between pursue. It gets into the entire role of the CPCRB, because the role of the CPCRB is to review an investigation, but effectively, and the current law has it that, as it was pointed out, well, if there's a difference of opinion between the chief and the CPCRB, it goes to the Board of Trustees. The fact of the matter is, it should never come before you, because if you are hearing a case involving an officer before a charge has actually been preferred, you're effectively biased. You're hearing the opinion, you're hearing it before there's even a charge brought. The CPCRB is an advisory committee only to say, basically, we think that this is what happened, and they should report that to the chief, which is what actually occurs in most municipalities. They report it to the chief. The decision to prefer the charges is solely that of the chief, and then this board would hear it. So there are internal issues within the current law, and frankly, within the local law that I wrote to you in my memo, that require to be revised, because this board has to keep itself somewhat distant from that, because if a charge were brought, it could easily be argued by the officer involved, well, you guys heard about this even before the charge was brought. You heard all the evidence. You weren't supposed to hear anything. So that's something that's going to have to get resolved as we go down, whether it's an independent investigator or not, because the role is simply to say, well, is it a substantiated charge? Is it unfounded? Is it exonerated? That's it. They can report that to the chief, and the chief is then should do his determination as to whether or not a charge should be preferred. But the CPCRB is not the entity that is preferring charges. The independent investigator is not the individual who will be preferring charges. That rests and has always rested and must be explicitly clear, rests just with the chief. So as I pointed out, what's in the current code is in fact plain wrong. It just shouldn't be there.
Is it the
Because-
current local code?
Yes.
All right, and we're following Westchester County?
Well, if I may, the current code says the decision whether to pursue disciplinary charges shall be the village board's. The Westchester County Police Act does not say that, and we are guided by the Westchester County Police Act. The decision to pursue charges is the decision of the chief. The decision on hearing the charges and what the result is, that's the board's decision. But you don't, the example is this, Mayor, this board has never been asked to sign charges. And that's because it's not your role. Your role is to decide the charges. Deciding is not the same as pursuing them. So actually, the
Once we
language in
hear
the
the
code,
charges, what do we do?
what?
Once we hear charges from the chief, what do we do?
You make a determination
Of what?
whether or not the charges should be sustained or not.
Okay,
But that's not pursuing the charges. Pursuing the charges is actually bringing the charge. So the language that was used before is inconsistent with what is the Westchester County Police Act. That language would have to be changed under any circumstance here, because the board does not pursue the charges.
People ask me, Omar, why do you get involved with the police and all this? It's because it's never boring. The plot thickens yet again. Stuart, you're bringing this to us. I mean, this is
working on this for months.
yeah. So here's what I would love. I would love taking a look at local law 1 as it stands under 3 lenses. Number 1 is legal issues like the one that you just brought up, Stuart, that conflict with either our code or what our code should be. Those are things that are in your wheelhouse, Stuart. Second is what are issues that are, this is what a lot of the substance of this conversation has been, from police leadership perspective. What are your thoughts about this local law? These are all the things that what we're talking about. If we're going to do it in outside investigator, how might that work? All that kind of stuff. But then number 3 is, and this is still something that I have not heard anything substantive on, is how does all of this content in the local law interact with the PBA and the union contract? And are there any places where there are conflicts or we're going to run into issues? I would love to know that beforehand, rather than going through all the trouble of passing local law 1. We do all that, and then it turns out that we're stepping in it because there's something that we could have foreseen. I don't know whose wheelhouse it is to do that. That may be Stuart, that may be somebody else, but I would just love to have that perspective. I think somebody's contacted the PBA. I would love the PBA perspective to ensure that we're heading it off at the pass. Those are just my thoughts.
The PBA has been provided with this. They're aware of it. Sergeant Spinelli has indicated that they're in the process of reviewing it and will provide comments as to whether or not it is the local law is in conflict with the contract. My response to that is no. But again, the important thing is that that the discipline has to remain with the individual who conducts the discipline. And what has happened in these other municipalities is that courts have found that effectively the discipline role has been shifted, or at least been given some responsibility to someone else or some other entity. That has been found to be impermissible in at least 2 and possibly 3 court decisions so far.
Has it stood in any course?
One appellate court has already affirmed that, yes. The Geneva decision just came down last month.
Got it.
But the Rochester decision was affirmed by the appellate division.
Right. So, I mean, all of this is happening because in 2020, this process started, and as what were there, 440 submissions to the governor's office?
Approximately.
Right. So somebody has to go through all of that. Then everybody's doing what we're doing. You're going through a process. We all have different local laws, city laws, etc. And as we go through the process, different things pop up. That's part of the process. It isn't that things move like molasses or that Zoom. I think it's just part of how laws are designed, because they stay on the books a long time before they get redesigned. So the other option, which Trustee Lopez didn't mention, which is an option, just food for thought, that when we stumble upon one element, because there were other things, is it a possibility to leave that out of the law, do more research, get more explanation on that element, and then we do that at a later date on that element? An example is a third party investigation format would be, because there are other things in this, that maybe we do the local law minus this aspect, which needs now more research because of what you just described, Stuart, and what you have recently discovered, et cetera, et cetera. Is that also a possibility for a path forward?
Uh,
Or is it one size, like the whole law has to?
No,
encompass
no, well, first of all.
Just throwing it out there. I'm not. saying
Laws
it-
can always be revised if the board wanted to pass a revision to chapter 8, which included, let's say, 7 of the 8 recommendations from the PRAC, and one is sort of being out there because it requires more. The board could do that, and that eighth recommendation could come in in another local law. There's no
Just
reason that
another
could not be
path
done.
forward. Okay, and the other thought I had, and Trustee Lopez, because he's the liaison to this, which is why I'm pointing to him, is that maybe Chairperson Shaw and possibly Lieutenant Zimmerman maybe sit together. And by the way, you could do this on Zoom because it doesn't have to be confidential, but meet, because Lieutenant, she's actually relatively not new. She sat a number of boards. She was chosen as a chair to this for very specific reasons. She's a longtime standing community member. She sat on board. She's been a chair. She's been a trustee in the town. It's like she understands process and but she's also not necessarily have been intimately involved, but not intimately involved. So she doesn't hold on to some of the thoughts that some members have, to be honest about it, that might be helpful to sort of iron through some of the thoughts rather than a whole bunch of people in the room. It's sometimes easier to have a couple of people in the room, and by room it could be on Zoom, it could be in a way. I don't know if she's willing to do it. I mean, yeah, she has a full-time job too, but it's just an idea, Trustee Lopez, that I'm throwing out there so we can move forward.
Yeah, I think that the lieutenant, it sounds like he's open to that conversation, and I think that the biggest thing that we got out of tonight was having his voice and partnership in this process, and it's obvious we have some details to go through, so we probably do that behind the scenes, and then bring forward essentially what happened last time. The Police Reform Advisory Committee made their recommendations. We had conversations behind the scenes. Then we bring forward the revised version, and then we move from there.
Right, so it becomes just food for thought. Is there anything else that we need on this legislation, Chief or Lieutenant, that you haven't mentioned, that you want to mention before we move on to the next item?
I guess just flipping through some pages here. I guess some of the, I guess also when it comes down to, I guess 8-15, the mediation process.
Yes.
Would any findings of that be then part of discovery in someone's personnel file?
I have to look into that. That's a fair question. I'd have to.
Thanks
look
for
into
bringing that forward. Good one. And tonight's not the only night. You might have nothing better to do later tonight, and you may want to circle some more ideas.
Yeah, I just, I mean, I know it's a new concept, and I know it was probably, I don't want to, like, Omar always says, second and third order problems to that, things that are unseen that, may have the best intentions up front, but could have impacts that we don't realize moving down the line. And even some of the other things in this, as far as rules of evidence are concerned for discovery, for any criminal cases that are going on, aside from anything that may end up in an officer's personnel file, namely the complainant sometimes would be more affected by that than a police officer would be. If some of these things, as far as information sharing and document sharing before any criminal case is satisfied before being heard by the CPCRB. I know that currently that's not the case, but I know there's a revised section in here that would allow for that in the event that Corporation Council, agrees to it. But I think that could potentially present its own problems with laws of evidence and discovery and having things be, out there that really shouldn't at that point in time.
I'll look into that one as well. Thanks.
No problem.
Okay. Anybody else? I'll take that as a no. All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for taking the time with us tonight, Maddie.
Okay, our next agenda item is another Stuart. Back at the work session on May 11th, Stuart had brought forth the concept of a change to a local law allowing for remote meetings under extenuating circumstances. I think the proposed local law was circulated earlier this week. We are hopeful that you've had a chance to give it an eyeball, and then we can call for a public hearing at next week's meeting so as to try as best we can to stay on the timeline so it's in place by the time the emergency order is lifted.
Or as close to it as possible. From what
Exactly
I
right.
read.
Yep.
Yes. Thank you, Maddie. Good evening again, folks. This is proposed local law 6 of 2022, which would add a new chapter 57 to the code entitled Video Conferencing by Public Bodies. And it essentially follows the recently enacted revision to the open meetings law, which added a new section 103A, allowing for remote meetings under extenuating circumstances. And again, to be clear, what it allows for is that a member can attend remotely without the public being noticed of that location where there is an extenuating circumstance, be it illness, childcare issues, things like that. The laws passed by the state legislature requires municipalities that want to adopt this video conferencing rule to pass a local law following a public hearing, which is what this does, and also to adopt rule of procedures for video conferencing. A set of those procedures, a draft was sent to you folks as well. Those procedures would also go on the website of not only the village board, but also all other boards that would be so affected. That would include the Planning Board, Board of Architectural Review, Historic Preservation, Zoning Board of Appeals, and any other boards that would be subject to the open meetings law. But effectively, this would allow for those remote meetings in extraordinary circumstances. There is a provision in here which is not in the local law, is not in the state passed law, but I've added in here with your approval, which essentially says that the board continues to authorize the use of platforms or remote platforms to broadcast meetings of public bodies remotely, affording the public an opportunity to watch, listen, and or participate. I just wanted it to be clear that we were not going to, that the board would not just be approving remote meetings in the case of extraordinary circumstances, but that we would be doing hybrid meetings for whoever wants to basically participate from the public. That's been a big boon for our land use boards to be able to have applicants appear remotely because they can then share screens. It can show up on the large screen in the op center or wherever the meeting is to be held, and has been a huge benefit. I know that the planning director has told me that he is certainly going to push applicants as much as possible to attend remotely. They obviously would have the option to attend in person, but being able to attend remotely and have their representatives put the plans up on the screen and discuss that way is a big benefit. This also does not change the current open meetings law, that if a member wants to appear remotely and is in a location where the public can attend, that member can, the notice can certainly provide that member's location and the member can attend that way. But this, the revision to the local law does give the option for remote meetings or a member to attend remotely in the case of extraordinary circumstances. Other than repeating what the extraordinary circumstances are as set forth in the local law or in the state's law, such as disability, illness, caregiving responsibilities, or other unexpected factors, I have not put in any specific other types of extraordinary circumstances. And essentially, it's just that the member has to indicate that he or she has had an extraordinary circumstance and therefore is unable to attend. So it's not as if the board or the other boards involved would be in a position to say, no, that's not an extraordinary circumstance, you must attend the meeting. But that member should provide in writing to either the mayor or the chair of the other boards that he or she is unable to attend, and specify what that extraordinary circumstance is, so that there's at least a record of that. Otherwise, the public notices would continue the same, because we would be doing it with a remote component anyway for the public. But this will allow the public to attend at the same location where at least a quorum of members is attending publicly. Right now, we are still under the executive order suspending the open meetings law with regard to public attendance. That suspension goes through the 15th of June. If the state of emergency is continued, then the board can continue to meet remotely. But if it is not continued, then this would provide the option for the remote meetings under extraordinary circumstances. So that's proposed local law 6 of 2022. I'm available to answer any questions.
Anybody have any questions?
I have a question. Can, I don't know if we can provide, maybe guidelines is the right word, or some thoughts. You know how when we have an executive session, we don't have to say the exact content, but we say like matters of real estate or
Yes.
whatever. So can we say just like, I'm attending remotely due to extenuating circumstances, I forget the exact language, I'll look it up. But due to personal reasons, due to health, due to, I don't know how specific we need to get. My point is that by giving some guidelines, folks don't feel like they have to divulge personal information while still providing
I think
enough information.
I think, trustee, well, two things. One, I don't see that it has to be publicly divulged anyway.
Okay.
But I would think, if we use sort of the categories that are in the state law. So let's say I'm unable to attend because of illness, blank. I'm unable to attend because caregiving responsibilities, or an unexpected, because in a lot of times, you folks know this better than I, something may happen literally right before the meeting, which is going to make it that you can't get, you're on the Metro North train and it's just stuck, in the 125th Street tunnel, and you're just not going to get out in time. That's an extraordinary circumstance, which you may not know of. By having the availability of having it in a sense as a quote unquote hybrid meeting, the notice will always be the same, because we'll always be providing the Zoom link for the public. If, for example, the mayor is made aware that a trustee is unable to attend in person because of an extraordinary circumstance, I think that all the mayor, or let's say the chair of the zoning board, would have to say is member X is not attending live because of an extraordinary circumstance. And that's all. And I think that's all that has to be said. And I think that's perfectly fine.
Right.
And I think
So-
that would suffice.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds good, and it's important also for us on the other level that we have the rule of 75% attendance. And so, you want people to be able to make that 75%, even if it's not always in person, but they've got their iPhone and they could sit down somewhere, because to use Stuart's example, Metro North got stuck. It's winter time for now, but they could still make the meeting, still have input, whatever. I mean, it makes sense. I think the corollary of that is abuse, right? So there are people who have, I don't know, childcare issues. So people that have children versus the people that don't, who people that have children might always have childcare issues at every meeting. And so who then sits there and say, listen, you knew you had children, you joined the committee, you still have children and childcare. It's not fair to other people who then have to be, because you have to have a quorum, I think is the issue, right? You still have to have a quorum. So it can't be the same 1, 2, or 3 people that happen to have children who get to have a little bit more of the convenience, if you will. Not that anybody's questioning their childcare issues. It simply becomes a bit of an equity issue about different members. Not everybody feels the same way. And it could be elder care, by the way. I'm not saying it's just children. It could be an elderly person. It's a family care. So I always feel weird about abuse because you could sort of predict a lot of stuff. I often feel, let's try it out. And if there is abusive behavior, we might have to come back and say, listen, there's certain people that are continuously whatever. They're continuously late, or they continuously only come for half the meeting, or they always have child care issues. It's not fair to those that don't. I feel like either we have a choice. Either we put that in now with some clarity, like who makes that decision, who speaks to a person, or we say, let's be trustful of people. They're volunteers. They know their life situation. This allows for more flexibility. Let's see how it works, and we can come back to it if it's a problem. I just want to point that out. And I will not get off this thing until I swear that I cannot believe that the governor did not allow virtual meetings to continue in the 21st centuries. Once we all learned how to do it, people of all ages, people of all incomes, the convenience, the cost savings to everybody concerned, even the land use where you sometimes have to pay lawyers to sit in a room till their turn was up on the agenda and have to pay them for that time, when now you could just text them and say, you can come on now and save a little money. And people don't have cars who can join these things. So yes, I'm on a soapbox. I'll take Omar's role tonight. I'm just going to go that maybe one day the governor will hear it. The public should know that it was an option that was turned down because there is a very large part of the state of New York, as was brought on by both the village manager and Stuart Kahan, who want meetings in person, and this was a bit of a compromise, I think. So anyway, I'm going to go with, for me, I'm supportive of it. I thought you put something together really well. If there tends to be 1 or 2 people that are constantly the ones not coming, or doing their bit, we can figure that out maybe later. I don't know. That's sort of where I'm leaning. Others might have a different opinion, but I think you want to know whether we're okay with what you put forward, as Maddie had described.
Right, so that we could
Vote.
have a vote next week to schedule a public hearing. The public hearing would then be on the 15th.
Yeah, so I'm good with that.
Okay.
I mean, for my 1 vote. Anybody else?
Guess I could go. I guess I'm in support. I'm with the mayor and Omar with this. I just, with the concept, I guess we're going backwards in a way. I'm in support with the law that gives the flexibility on this. And I think hopefully the mayor was not talking about this board with the persons with the kids, because that's just Omar, you and I will be the ones to blame,
Shots fired. You was talking about us. That's all right. That's all right. We'll talk about her too.
No. I actually thought elder care should be added because I think that's also something. And I don't know if that's different than family care. I would never do. I babysit your kids. I could be home with your kids, and you can go to the meeting.
You're more than welcome.
The door's wide
I was
open.
talking to Omar, Manny.
Oh.
Kidding. I'll take Lily. It's fine.
No, I think as a compromise, if there's something like that, there is nothing else. Sure, this is only one option that we have. So thank you, Stuart, for all the hard work that you put into this. So yeah,
Yeah, and because it's taken us so long to talk about it, I think Jamie's gonna have to put something in writing to send to all the chairs. Otherwise, Stuart, you have to go in front of every committee and do all the explaining as to how everything works and da 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 da.
It's already, actually, there's been a memo sent out there's been a memo sent out about the local law and that we were proposing this. So Jaime is aware of it, Linda Whitehead's aware of it, and I sent it to the chairs of the boards.
Great, thank you, Stuart. Yeah, I guess
Okay.
next week sounds pretty good.
Great. Thank you, Dana. Is that a thumbs up, thumbs down?
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm trying to think of what an extenuating, what about like if you're on vac, right,
vacation.
I'm trying to think. Okay, it sounds good.
I think Stuart is saying it could be an extenuating, and here are the examples of it. If something comes up that who knows what, like a pandemic, for example, but then I think there'll be executive orders about that in a state of
Correct.
emergency, so it's not affected
Or
because.
maybe I break my leg, knock on wood, that doesn't happen, and I
Right, it's in
can't
there.
physically come, and so I could, that's an extenuating circumstance, right?
That would be
It's in there.
one.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen.
Okay, I'll have the resolution
you,
for hearing
Stuart.
next week. Thank you.
Maddie.
Yes, okay, thank you, Stuart. The next thing we've got is a grant application. We have a special meeting immediately following this, and time is somewhat of the essence, which is why we have it in that order. So on June 1st, the Hudson River Estuary Planning Grant Program through the DEC is due for submission. This is a grant that we had applied for back in 2021 with the help of a grant writer on contract. The feedback we got from the DEC last year was that they really loved our application, but for the fact that we did not have letters of support from the affected private property owner. So let me talk just quickly about what the grant application is. Basically, under this program, we would be eligible for up to $50,000, 50, in funding to create a resilience plan for the Ossining waterfront. So that would incorporate not only the public parcels that are currently being dealt with under the CAD grant program, but this would also allow us to work with private property owners along the waterfront, help them to discover how they can make their properties more resilient to flooding and sea level rise, while also working with them to develop concepts to provide greater public access to the waterfront, and then hopefully find a way to connect Crawbucky over to Gordine Park in some way, shape, or form. So again, this is a planning grant. Basically, the entire thing would go towards paying a consultant who is well versed in this kind of work to do it for us. We have established a timeline for the grant application. If we were to get it, it wouldn't begin until probably very late fall, early next year. So hopefully we'll have a couple of our other projects off the plate by that time. And again, this is mainly going to be I don't mean to make you laugh.
I'm going to tell you that plate, like the
I know.
infamous proverbial plate, is the size of a room now. But okay, we'll just make it large. You mentioned about the neighbors. So did you get this? I think the bottom line is, did you get neighbors to sign on, or
Right.
or
So
whatever?
we have spoken to Chatham, we've spoken to the folks at Westerly Marina, and we've spoken to GDC. So we have sent them a draft template letter. We're going to be following up with them tomorrow. We've also gotten letters of support from some of our local electeds, and we're using practically the same application we did in 2021 with a couple of tweaks. The reason that time is of the essence why it's taken this long is we were waiting for the two consultants we asked for a price quote to come back, which actually came back just earlier this week. So you'll see in the resolution, we must provide up to a 15% match. In this case, the lower price came in just over $99,000, which means the village would have to make a commitment of around $45,000. The other quote came in well over $200,000. So it's safe to say that we'd be getting a good deal if in fact this consultant were to put their hat in the ring during an RFP process. But again, we just wanted to make sure that we brought this forth to the board. Happy to answer any questions that you might have in terms of what would be involved. And again, because the work is not likely to start until early next year, this is something that could be budgeted for in the 2023 operating if we do decide to go forward.
We're not obligated to go forward even if we get the grant,
That's
correct?
exactly right. If we get the grant, we can always say, you know what, conditions have changed, we're not able. That's certainly possible, but we do need to make sure that if we do wish to submit early next week, that we have in hand a resolution of support from this board.
Okay. Comments, questions? No? Okay, I'll just make a quick comment to the public for the record. In addition to being a good idea, when you have a waterfront community where everything goes toward the Hudson, like everything, every wrapper that you throw, every toilet that you flush, everything goes downhill to the Hudson River. It's really important to do studies often and update them about both the waterfront and resiliency. It's not just an environmental issue, it's actually an issue in how you build going forward. So you have to look at the present and then you have to say, what's in the pipeline? What are we thinking about? Even if you do nothing on the waterfront, you still have to do these studies, and communities that don't do them suffer greatly for them later. I won't mention names, but even in Westchester, even with DRI, things have been done. And once digging started, many discoveries were had, costing in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. So it's not for me to speak about others. It is only for me to speak about the village. We are on the waterfront, and there are people who live there. There are people who do business there. There are people who have, you know, and as when you said it's Ginsburg, so it's Westerly. For those that don't know what it is, it's that whole Westerly complex that's down there, for the restaurant to the apartments where people live, and we have more going on down there on so many levels from DRI. So I think this is very important. It's getting more and more expensive to hire consultants, much more than I recall 2-3 years ago for studies. You know, so I have no comments about how prices are just becoming very high. But once we put this through, in my opinion, it should be a yes, we should support it. And then when we really get the grant and we understand what's involved, we'll see if we want to take it on. We'll see what the economy looks like. We'll see if we can afford it. We'll see if the public wants it. But I think we have to move it forward, because we don't get to that point until we get to the point, I guess. So I'm supportive of it. For my singular vote, I think other people said I think we should move forward, because nobody said no, is really the way I look at it. So let's get that going.
We have a resolution on the special meeting in just a
Yeah.
few minutes.
It's yep.
Okay, so the next item, also grant related. This is the board may recall last year during the CFA, the consolidated funding application process. The village board authorized us to put in an application through the Department of State for firehouse consolidation. So we got a very strong candidate team who is very highly regarded, particularly in this area, which is a tough area to find people who do work in specifically this. We had met, and by we I mean myself, Manager Jatori, and Trustee Fritchie, to discuss if they were able to reduce the scope at all to align more closely with the budget that we had put forth with the Department of State. We were able to make a couple of reductions, not incredibly sizable. We did go through item by item with the consultant team, and then again with Trustee Fritchie wearing his fire department hat as well, to make sure that we didn't decrease the ability to actually measure what we intend to measure, which is which of our firehouses are in good enough shape to potentially house additional companies, and which potential sites throughout the village might be contenders for new construction. So the total that we're getting from the state for this project, we have been in touch with our representative at Department of State, who told us that unfortunately the award is the award. We're not able to get any more in this round based on the fact that our application said what it said. He did remind me, however, that the implementation money, should we be successful in this portion, might be quite sizable. And that's something we would have to apply for once the study was done. So again, we're getting almost $19,000 from the state of New York towards the total. The town has also agreed to match funds. I think it's about $6,800. And so the village would effectively have to bring on the lion's share of the money. We would be asking for a resolution on the June 1st meeting to authorize the contract, and then also creating a capital project, which is going to be fees for the consultant, but then also time and materials that the consultant might have outside of the contract proper, and then also topographical surveys that we may need later on in the process to take a look at various properties as I described earlier. So I'm sorry that Trustee Fritchie couldn't join us. I know that he was instrumental in getting us to this point, and asked a lot of really important questions of the consultants to make sure that our scope was on track. I believe he would tell you, and we'll hopefully have a chance to do so next week, that he's quite satisfied with what was put forth. Again, not only as a trustee but as a member of OFD, and I'm happy to again answer any questions in that regard.
Okay, I'm not happy about the pricing. Nobody here is, because especially if you guesstimate it wrong when you do your budget, you suffer for it later. On one hand, on the other hand, our fire departments and firehouses were built for horse and carriage. I am not, this is not a metaphor, it's actually, or a simile, this is actually real. And this administration, I think, is tackling, I mean, tonight alone, police reform, firehouses, waterfront, mobility, lots of stuff in one meeting because we're doing lots of stuff. I think, we're fortunate. We don't always have somebody from who's an experienced firefighter. We've had it before, but we don't always. And I think past administration sort of didn't really take the time to look at this issue. It's a tough issue because it could end up being expensive. It's an important issue. Again, I personally, and speak for myself, during COVID have seen what the fire department did, along with the police, along with all the first responders. But they don't just put out fires. They prevent, they teach, they do a lot of the service. It's essential in a community that is so densely populated as well. There's just all sorts of good reasons here. I think for me, I would be supportive of it. Bob was texting me before. He just can't make the meeting. He's trying, but he got stuck. So, I know he's been involved in it. So I'll tell I think it's worth doing. I think it's it's a multi-year. It's complicated, etc., etc. But I mean, I think it's great that we're taking on such complex scenarios. And again, we'll see where it takes us. The last time we did this was 2009.
I think 2008.
Yeah, so it's 2022. Like, we have to do it, and we then have to use the information and not shelve it. Otherwise, we're truly not doing what I think we can. So that's I'm in support of it. Others, comments, questions we've discussed before.
I will also comment that, of course, we were disappointed as well that it came in so high over what we had anticipated. But this grant program in particular, it's basically a 100% match. So for every dollar the state gives you, you have to give them $1. So it's not as though, we could have done too much better, even if we had asked for, more money initially. So just wanted to throw that detail out.
Yeah, it's expensive, and Dale is going to have to start thinking about that as well, because you're also leaving on the table those other pieces, which didn't sound like you guys know, whether that's a small bread box or the whole kitchen sink is about to be thrown on us, which is the extra fees above and beyond, and that's a little tricky. Again, it's 2022, last time with this 2009, and the fire houses and department is a big aspect of the community. So I feel like we just have to move forward. Okay, that's my singular vote. Comments, questions, thoughts from the board, and where are we going with it?
I have no questions, Mayor. Thank you.
Support, not support, where are we going? Or you're waiting to hear more?
No, that I don't make that was a public statement. That my comment that was made last time on this one, I'm in support of this, but again, we have to look at a logistic plan an approach, not just for the firehouses, but through all the buildings in our municipality. So that's my comment, I guess.
Right. I remember, remember that. Anybody else?
I'm in support. I would like to have Trustee Fritchie to have his thoughts on record. So at some point we could have him give his thoughts to just this where we are at this point, but I'm good with it.
Okay, I'm not seeing anybody else. Oh, that's a thumbs up. Okay, yeah, I mean, you could even ask Trustee Fritch if he just, I mean, you could put him in writing and let him sign. I mean, we just need it for the record. He's like sort of our in-house advisor on a lot of this, and he wears both hats oftentimes. So it would be nice to have it moving forward. Next, Maddie.
Okay, last and certainly not least, this was a late breaking request from Sustainable Westchester on Monday. Basically, the ask is to get a thumbs up from the board for the mayor to sign a letter to the Public Service Department to ask them to make, let me start over. This is a little complicated, I'm sorry.
So it's complicated, which is why it's being brought in front of you. And I will say before Maddie starts, that Maddie is my go-to person with Sustainable Westchester in the sense of they have lots of meetings about lots of topics, and it's not always so easy to understand. So I appreciate the work you're doing, Maddie, but it's actually my request that she be my go-to person on behalf of myself, because there are so many meetings, but they're also important meetings. So Maddie really is, so that you all know if you have a question is really my point. So Maddie, try again.
Yeah, but I'm going to start again from a different time to the fork here.
Yes.
So about a week ago, we were sent some draft legislation from Sustainable Westchester, which would enable the village to put something into our code that would allow low-income residents to take first advantage of a solar credit on their electricity bills. Stuart, have I captured that accurately?
Perfectly.
Okay, great. And basically Sustainable Westchester did a huge amount of work in that they already took our, as in the Village of Ossining section of code, and suggested exactly what it would take. So that sort of spares Stuart several hours of work on that front. There is a discussion on this local law tomorrow evening that I will be joining so that I make sure that I understand it more fully. But so that's coming to you shortly. At the same time, Sustainable Westchester is requesting that Mayor Levin put forth or sign a letter along with every other municipality that is a part of Sustainable Westchester to ensure that, in fact, the lowest income communities do have access to these opt-out services, and that communities that have a great share of those low-income customers are also able to take advantage and are not precluded from the program. Stuart, again, if I butchered that, please correct me.
Nope, keep going.
Nope. Okay, cool. That's pretty much all I got. And again, this was just given to us on Monday. They need to know by May 30th whether the mayor will be signing on because the letter's due back to Public Service Commission on June 6th. So no other action is required, but for everyone to give a thumbs up or thumbs down, and then we can take it from there.
Yeah, the letter was written in such a convoluted way that it took me quite a while. I read it like 3 times. Normally I would sign. We have been part of Sustainable Westchester. We were like one of the first ones on the aggregation method that they use. Obviously oil right now is so expensive, so everybody's focused. It was written in such a way that really you had to investigate until you got to like paragraph 3 or so. I don't have it in front of me, but I remember saying the low income part was like almost a footnote, when in fact it should have been paragraph 1. And so I found it actually, and I actually contacted Maggie and said, you may want to let's make sure the board understands. So this is a good thing. Why didn't I just sign it? Well, I didn't just sign it because I don't know where this is landing. Part of the issue is that they feel that in trying to do the right thing, the state may have accidentally, inadvertently, not appreciated what can be done for low income families, and they want that inserted and they want to make a point out of it. I think I'm saying that approximately correctly as I read it. And so they're sitting there saying, please sign this, because we want to make sure that it goes to, as they say, the top of the letter, the top of the story, and not buried. I want to make sure this, I think kudos to them. I think they're right. I think obviously that we should sign it, but I also want you to know what's going on, because maybe it hits a press release, maybe it hits the media, maybe they say things like 42 municipalities joining us, and is mentioned in it. It isn't only for low income. That is not the point here. It is that inadvertently in what they want to do, the low income piece of it needs to be highlighted, I think, from their point of view. And so you might see it written up. So this is a little bit of an explanation of what we looked at. And yeah, there was like the turnaround time is yesterday. I mean, it's just very, very quick. They did their homework, as they usually do. So that is why this is informative, I think, is the way I would put it. This is why I didn't just sign it. I wanted you guys to maybe ask if you have questions, if you oppose it, if you don't, if you want some more information. That's what this part is about. I hope I didn't mess it up more, but I just wanted to explain also why it's not just, oh, I'll sign and support you. One more thing, because this is real and they're fighting for something here, and I think it should be noted that they're fighting for something that's important. Anyway,
I'll start. I'm in favor of this, although I need to in transparency, let everybody know. Sustainable Westchester specifically, although environmental issues like this broadly are in my top 3 topics I barely understand that we work on. And so, the others are land use, I barely understand. We started talking about T-zones and you lost me. And the like water treatment plant and technical stuff like that, God bless. I try my best, I really do, but estoy perdido, I'm lost. So I'm in support with what I understand.
okay, thank you. And a little bit of trust, because that's how I prefaced. Maddie has been sitting on meetings like weekly, not only about this, and we are one, and before, I think, I don't know if it's before my time, but Ossining is a major player with Ossining, with Sustainable Westshore, and the supervisors on the board. I mean, we are communities, the town and the village, that have been involved with them. Solar, everything. I'm very proud of that. That to me is a great thing, and they've grown and they've done amazing stuff throughout. There used to be a southern one and a northern one, and now they've done great stuff. So I'm a proponent of the work they do, but everyone and every once in a while we need explanations of what is happening, because they sometimes move quickly. So Maddie's your go-to. I am too, but I mean, she literally sits, and I think Victoria Caffarelli sits in a lot of meetings for the town on this. So just as an FYI, for those of you that want to learn more, again, call either one of them and say, hey, I need to know more about this. Like, and there might be 18 meetings that Maddie may have already gone to. So I also want to point that out. Manny or Dana, any questions, comments, thoughts? Because we need to.
I'm in support. I'm just going to blame Maddie.
Okay.
All right, fair.
She's okay with that.
No, definitely, one thing that I want to piggyback from the mayor said, I think I'm not sure right now, but I think a couple of years back when we first started the Northern Coalition portion of that, the roofs in our village were changing. And, there was a lot more in Austin than in a lot of the communities at some point. I'm not sure if that's changing or not, but we're always first on taking advantage of that, and I think this is another opportunity for us to take advantage of that, of those programs like that. So yeah,
and honestly, they used to come. I think the last mayor would have them come and do half-hour, 45-minute presentations with new stuff. Now we're like moving on a monthly basis. We'd have to have them in every month to the stuff that we'd like to do about all sorts of environmental issues. It's not practical, or we'd slow everything down on one or the other. Dana, questions, comments? I'm looking at my clock. I have this commitment of we're done with me. There's no exec session. I want to be done by 11. So now that I said that, that doesn't give you much time to talk. Sorry, Dana.
I was just saying, if it's good enough for Maddie, it's good enough for me.
All right.
Maddie, look at you.
All right.
Wow.
I do want to mention again, I will be on the webinar tomorrow afternoon. If anyone else is interested, I'm happy to circulate it. It's at 4 o'clock, I believe. But also Sustainable Westchester has already committed to come to our next work session on June 8th to speak more about the proposed local law. So again, it's sort of out of order. It would have been nice to have had the conversation in a different
It's
order.
not always their fault either. And honestly, we're probably once a year. And frankly, I would say not the local law. You should really ask them to do, and please, I don't want them more than 10, 15 minutes. They need to bring it home. And, people have done startups in California with presentations shorter than 15 minutes. I'd like them to also tell us not just this, but like what's the next 6 months? What are we looking at? Quick, succinct, move on, because they are working a lot of things with us.
Yeah, I will certainly pass that along. I think the last couple times they've been with us, it's to report back on CCA, which again is incredibly technical, complicated, and that sort of sucks all the oxygen out of the room. So yes, understood.
It's a good thing we're not recording all this in case they're listening.
It's true. It's incredibly technical, and talking about the energy markets and that kind of stuff. I mean, it's dense.
Yeah, somebody did call me though. I have to say that because we record and discuss the energy markets, because that's what he does for a living and lives in Austin. And he said that he actually has a PhD in, well, like literally this is his field. And he was like, that's pretty good that they were able to do it. He actually thought it was great that they were able to discuss it. So I guess it's a matter of perspective. Stuart, what else do you need from us?
Actually, Mayor, I need I'm going to need a motion to adjourn the work session to go into special session.
Yes, I forgot. Yes. Okay, folks.
So move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Bye.
And Mayor,
Folks, thank you.
And just
Sorry.
before we go into special session, I do want to say, I know you were talking about that our plate is getting larger. That only reminds me of the wonderful line from the movie Jaws, where they said, we're going to need a bigger boat. So
Okay, plates, boats, all the same thing.
With that-
Maddie's in the middle of it. though.
with that, we are now into the special meeting. And let me just take attendance so we can be all formal here. We are starting this at 10:40 p.m. Trustee Lopez,
Present.
Trustee White,
Present.
Deputy Mayor Quezada,
Present.
and Mayor Levin.
Present.
Okay. Is there any member of the public who wishes to comment on any of the two resolutions that are on this evening's special meeting agenda?
I'm looking in the gallery. It doesn't look like anyone has their hand up.
Thank you.
You're
Okay.
welcome.
First resolution, Resolution A, resolution to the Board of Trustees of the Village of Austining authorizing submission of application for the Hudson River Estuary Program's Local Stewardship Planning Grant. Whereas the village desires to study and plan for how riverfront properties in Austining can be preserved and made more resilient to sea level rise and flooding. And whereas the Hudson River Estuary Program under the New York State Department of Conservation has identified as appropriate to fund such project. And whereas up to $50,000 per project is available with a 15% required match. And whereas cost estimates to retain a qualified consultant for the work have been obtained in the amount of $99,400. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby authorizes the village manager to file an application for the Hudson River Estuary Program's Local Stewardship Planning Grant through the New York State Department of, it should be Environmental Conservation, in the amount not to exceed $49,400. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Second.
Comments? We already had them. Stuart?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution B, authorizing the village manager to sign a proposal from Lothrop Associates LLP doing business as Aquatectonic. Resolved that the village manager is authorized to sign the May 6, 2022 proposal from Lothrop Associates DBA Aquatectonic, 333 Westchester Avenue, White Plains, New York, to provide architectural, lighting, landscape, and pool design services as part of the miscellaneous refurbishments and updates to the Joseph G. Caputo Community Center. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Second.
Comments?
Yes, I do. Just one comment, not that.
No, go ahead. No, please.
Stuart, and I know I have said this a bunch of times before, but in a contract, when we sign a contract with them, could you please ensure that all documents, CAD files, PDFs, Revit files, whatever type of system that they design with, we need a copy at the end of the day, please.
Yes,
For our
I
record.
will. I actually sent Deputy Mayor, I sent an email earlier today to Maddie and to Paul about a few things that need to be added in, some of which dealt with insurance issues and some other things. I will revise that and send it to be, because their agreement actually is silent on it. In fact, unlike some of the ones we've gotten from some of our other consultants. So I will make sure that the information is in there, that we have copies of all documents and all computer documents that are in
That'll be
connection with this
helpful.
project.
That'll be great. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Can we have a motion to adjourn the special meeting?
So move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We are not going into exec session tonight. It is 10:43, 25th of May. I am hoping the village manager is enjoying a few days off. I thank the staff for having the ship, now that we're using ship analogy versus plate analogy, moving forward. Stuart, I appreciate, this was like the Stuart Kahan meeting. And I appreciate all the work on so many different wide-ranging topics. And wishing everyone a good night. And if I don't see you, but I think I will be seeing some of you, I'm hoping people have a glorious Memorial Day.
Mayor, as I sent around to all you folks, you will see a drop in your gasoline prices coming on June 1st, because the state will no longer be, between June 1st and December 31st, there will be no longer a charge for state sales tax and state excise taxes.
So theoretically, the gas pumps should have lower.
Theoretically, because also but the county is now no longer going to be doing it on a percentage basis. They're going to be charging on a per gallon basis. So how that's actually going to work out at the end, we'll have to see.
And that's the gas pump for cars, not oil for home, correct?
That is correct. This is
Okay.
just for fuel for cars.
Okay, so more to discuss, because I'm not sure. I would say that the price should theoretically be lower, that unless oil skyrockets. So and for those of us, myself, who drives all electric, yay, go buy electric cars. Thank you all, and it's 10:45, the 25th of May, and wishing you all again a nice Memorial Day weekend for everybody. And there'll be some parades, and I'm sure some of us will be participating. So thank you all, and have a good night.